hopefully you all had a nice lunch. Glad to have you back, and you're going to have one of the best parts of the day you could ever ask for here. And nothing is as scary as what we did this morning talking about security for your systems, right? So I'm going to take just 1 second here to introduce my friend Darren Gillot from the IRS, and then Darren, I believe you're going to introduce Mary Beth for me? Cool, all right. So grab your seats, quiet down, and listen up.
Thanks. We don't normally get clapped for, so thank you. My name's Darren Gillot. I'm the Director of Field Collection Operations at the Internal Revenue Service. I'll be going back and forth with you for a couple of hours a little bit later. But before I start talking specifically about collection, and it'll be an update, some of the information for some of you I think I saw in Las Vegas or in San Antonio a year or two ago. We have the distinct pleasure of having the Commissioner of the Small Business Self-Employed Division of the Internal Revenue Service with us, Mary Beth Murphy. Mary Beth is going to be able to talk to you today, not just about some collection matters and recent legislation, but also a few things on the strategic side and to some degree even on the examination side. So I won't take up any more of her time. Mary Beth.
Thank you, Darren. So I'm the commissioner of SB, but more importantly, I was a revenue officer. I started my career here in Atlanta. I forgot how warm it is in Atlanta in June. So whoever turned on the air, thank you. And it's also my first time coming to a Tax Problem Solvers event. And so I talked to Darren. I said, so exactly what do they do? He said they ask a lot of questions. Which is good, because that's what we're here for. We're here to work with you to try to resolve complex tax issues, and even some simple ones as well. Darren and I this morning met with a group of revenue officers we actually hired last year, and they're in their phase 3 training, and we talked this morning about the importance of customer service and their responsibility, and I've already heard a couple of chuckles out there, but our employees, I mean, that is first and foremost, is to provide customer service and help taxpayers. Our job is to be corrective and not punitive. We constantly remind our folks of that, and this morning we did that with our new hires. And so I have a lot of updates to go over, but before I start, I just want to say thank you. We couldn't do the work that we do without our relationships with tax practitioners. You play a critical role in helping us resolve those complex issues. We've updated our website with contact information, and if you don't get what you need from the RO, go to the group manager, go to the territory manager, go to the area director, and then it goes to Darren. And the same thing on the examination side. I met with a congressman, and they were fearful to tell us who the client was. This is a United States congressman, and we said, you absolutely have the right to talk to the group manager, talk to the territory manager, so whether it's exam or collection. Our website's been updated. We've had some changes. The director of examination is Brenda Dial. The director of collection is now Paul Mamo. Paul comes to us from Wage and Investment. He most recently served on the senior executive team at the IRS as the Director of Online Services. We're excited to have him. And then in our operations and support organization, which is our fraud area, our penalties and interest, today it is Dee Barham, and Dee will retire in July, so it'll be Denise Vaughn. But we're here to provide a service to you, so if you can't get the answers that you need, go up the chain. I often get emails from folks, and then I give them to Darren or I give them to Brenda. But again, our job is to provide service to the American taxpayer, and so just wanted to leave that with you. So I'm going to talk about some of the updates, and boy have we been busy for the last year. We are doing tax implementation, we call it the TRIO, the team there, but as well as dealing with our budget situation. So our budget is somewhere around $2 billion. We have about 20,000 employees. We're down about 13,000 employees in SBSE. We have hit record lows. We've had a 34% decrease in our revenue agents. So we're down to 5,100 revenue agents. Revenue officers, we've got field revenue officers, 2,230 revenue officers that cover the entire country. And so you may not feel it, and the ROs don't feel it, but we're doing less. We're not touching as many taxpayers. And so we constantly are talking to IRS leadership, Treasury leadership, about the critical work that we do in both examination and in collection, but we have fewer people. Our hope is next year that we get some relief and we can hire folks. 52% of our leadership team can retire. And we've got 55 executives, 20,000 employees across the United States in small business. So leadership succession is high on our radar list, as well as attrition hiring for us to get some folks in both the revenue agent and the revenue officer positions. So what have we done to try to retain folks? Revenue officers, traditionally, their journey level was a GS9. With the help of Darren and his team last year, every revenue officer will go up to a GS11. Any IRS employees here knows that's significant. We're hoping it helps us with people leaving the service to go to private companies. And most recently, we did the same for the revenue agents. The journey level there was an 11, now it's a 12. And so we're hoping that that helps us work more complex, higher graded cases and helps us with keeping folks. We don't want folks to come into the IRS, get all the training and then leave. So that's what we're doing as far as our resources. So what are we doing in collection? Darren's going to go into some of the details of the work that he does in collection, but I just wanted to give an update of what we're doing in the private debt arena. There's been lots of blogging and lots of press on private debt collection. It's the law, so we have to do it. It's very clear the cases that we have to send to the private debt collectors. There are 4 different private debt collectors. They're not done geographically. It's just a random sample of where cases are routed to. But we started last April. We're accelerating the number of cases that we're sending to the private debt collectors. And there's criteria, and I really strongly suggest if you want information about the individual private debt collection, our website has lots of really good up-to-date information. I'm curious, how many of you had clients that have gotten a letter, private debt collector? Okay. Well, that's good. I'm curious to hear some of the feedback, which I'll take at the end. And so we're sending more and more cases to the private debt collectors. They're working many of the unable to locate, unable to contact, but cases up to $50,000. We just recently sent some larger dollar cases their way. And so they've generated about $35 million in revenue. And we've delivered about 300,000 cases, totaling over $2.3 billion of balance due inventory. I see a question in the back. No, they don't. They can't levy or lien. Only we can do that. They cannot do that, and they shouldn't be threatening that as well. We regularly go out and do reviews. My acting deputy commissioner and Paul Mamo and Fred Schindler from our headquarters collection were out in Rochester a couple weeks ago and visited both Pioneer and Conserve.
How are they compensated?
So I don't know exactly what their percentage is, but they bid, and it was done through our procurement office, and they don't share that with us. They get a percentage, no more than 25%. And so I don't know what the amounts are for the individual companies, and they're not all the same. They bid on these contracts.
About a year and a half ago at Foxwood, you said that if the case couldn't be resolved by the private debt collector, you're going to survey it or shelve it. Is that the same story?
It is, because we don't have the resources today to have a referral unit. So that is where we are today. So private debt collection today.
So you collect things by billing and auditing?
The calls that we've listened to, they encourage taxpayers to pay. They try to set up installment agreements. We have had instances where taxpayers have full paid. They just hadn't been contacted in a while. It's a small number. They have tools that we don't use at the IRS. They monitor every single call that they, any outbound call that they make. They monitor, they look for keywords. They've got a lot of data analytics that we don't use. And there is some success there. We're still early in private debt collection, and we're committed to providing them with the cases so that they can try to collect on behalf of the IRS. Any other questions about private debt collection? So,
One of the things that I've always told my clients is that the IRS will not call you, and if they do, not to take a call or to hang up on them. And the reason is because the IRS has put the information out there that it probably is going to be a scam. What is the IRS perspective now with the third-party debt collectors in that?
so the taxpayer gets a letter from us telling them that we're sending their account to the private debt collection company. They get a PIN from us. The private debt collection company then sends a letter to them, and there's an associated number as well. When the private debt collection company calls, they ask them to authenticate themselves with that PIN. The taxpayer lost the letter. We recommend that they ask that they resend the letter, so the taxpayer can authenticate themselves. We also recommend you can create an account online. I know it's not easy, but we strongly recommend that if taxpayers they go online, set up an account, and you can look at your balance due. People generally know if they have a balance due with the IRS, but we're doing what we can. We haven't had any incidences that I'm aware of to date with the private debt collectors having those kinds of problems. Now, fraud is still out there. These people that are making calls to innocent taxpayers, TIGTA has been working it for years, but it's ongoing. As soon as we, catch on to a scheme, there's another scheme, and then they, come right back. It's circuitous. They're back to the scheme that they used 2 and 3 years ago. So security is paramount for us. And all the exchanges, we did many, many tests with the private debt collection companies on securing data.
Yes, we had implemented this in the past, I forget how many years ago it was, with private, and then it went away. Do we still have the right not to work with the private debt collector and go back to the IRS? And I'm talking specifically when I have a lot of like non-filing type of cases, so there's a lot of returns are SFRs or returns that need to be done, so the balance due is not going to be correct anyway, and we don't want to put them into an installment agreement or a payment arrangement that we're not finished with the whole case.
So of course we want taxpayers to file delinquent returns.
And that's what we're working on
Okay.
first, and I want to get the balances correct, and then do the installment.
And so you can relay that to the private debt collector. Once that case, once those returns post, you'll start getting notices from ACS. It gives you an opportunity to work with the ACS. You don't have to work with the private debt collection companies. We would hope that you would. We look at them as an arm of the IRS, except that they can't lien and levy. In January 2019, we're going to start including trust fund cases that will go there, assessed trust fund. So that's teed up. We have a lot of trust fund cases out there, and we're going to give those to the private debt collectors to work. So another legislative mandate is Passport, our Passport program. We've worked very, very hard with the Department of State. We started sending cases over. Anyone in here, any of their clients get a Passport letter? 1, okay, 2. So Passport legislation is new to us. It's something that we've never done. We started sending data to the Department of State in January of 2018. We notify taxpayers that we're sending their information over, but they have 90 days, and you'd be surprised how many taxpayers have full paid for the fear of not being able to get a passport or renew. We are not revoking passports. We're denying renewals, or if someone never had a passport, the Department of State. We've got procedures and processes in place. The delegation for someone to certify that the cases go over has been delegated to me, and only when I have a delegation order can the Deputy Commissioner sign it. We've sent over about 95% of what we're going to send over. We started off very small, and we've been accelerating the number of cases that we're sending over to Department of State. Now, with that 90-day lag, last week we transmitted 10,000 cases, but we won't see what happens for 90 days. Many taxpayers are reacting to those letters. They're calling us and they're sending in correspondence to say, what do I need to do? And so taxpayers have full paid, part pay, and then if a taxpayer has a need for imminent travel, I also have the authority to send an expedited release over to the Department of State, and we do those as soon as they come into my mailbox. I sign off on those so that a taxpayer has the ability to travel. We've been seeing, like I said, we're sending, we started sending over batches in January. So after 90 days, we start to see, and I'm seeing about one a week for an expedite release. And then we're seeing varying numbers several times a day where taxpayers are just paying. They had refund offsets. So time will tell how successful this program is. Right now, the threshold is $51,000. Taxpayers that owe over $51,000, and we'll see what happens if that number stays there. But again, another legislative mandate. We're really proud of the work that we've done in sending cases over to Department of State. Question?
Yes, Mary Beth, if they are getting ready to travel outside the country and they are on your list owing more than $51,000, will that stop them from leaving the country?
No, as long as they have a valid passport. We're not stopping people. It's just the renewal of a passport or the issuance of a new passport. Very much like the Department of State does that for states for child support.
Just out of curiosity, if there is a specific letter number, a number for this letter, the client says, I just got a letter, we always ask for what's the number of the letter.
I don't have it in front of me, but I can get it before we leave today.
My concern on the passport issue is that the taxpayers give them 60 days to work this problem out while they're in a State Department hole. I can't get an IA in maybe 180 days. So what, have you seen any of that yet? I know we're early in the process. And it's almost like I'd like to go to taxpayer advocates and it's just broke down. You can't travel for your job.
So we have a dedicated workforce in Philadelphia that's answering the calls for passport. Darren's folks as well have all been trained in passport. I was in Nashville last week, and a very large dollar case, the taxpayer full paid, because they travel to Costa Rica a lot for their company, and just the fear that they wouldn't be able to travel for business. But if you ask for an expedite, they're done within 3 to 5 days. I mean, as soon as I get it, I sign them. And so I ask lots of questions when I see those. I'm curious. I saw one this week, and it was a balance due, obviously, over the $51,000. I don't see the case, but there were non-filed returns. They filed the returns. They worked with Philadelphia ACS, and we expedited the release so that they could get a passport. And we don't. At my level, I don't look at what were they traveling for work or personal travel, but we do expedite those. And so far, no complaints. I haven't heard of any. We're very conscientious when we get those requests because we don't want to harm someone or have someone not be able to travel, whether it's an illness, family matter, or work-related.
That was obviously foisted on you guys by legislation. I know you didn't want
Yeah.
to stand for that. And the law actually said that the State Department could even revoke passports rather than just not renew or issue a new one. And I've been talking to the state about that, and I can't get a straight answer. Do you guys have any idea? I know it's State Department's calling whether they're going to revoke or not, but with that, I mean, it would be a nightmare.
We're not requesting revocation. I'll just say that. We are not requesting revocation. We don't have any procedures and processes in place. And so at this time, it's just sending the notification over for the denial or non-renewal of a passport.
Is there a form to fill out to request the expedite? Renew or get a passport or letter to write?
you call into our ACS call site in Philadelphia, and I'm not sure, I'll have to get that information, but we can get it back. There's a form that I sign, or that I approve, but I don't know the process if the tax...
When you get the information, does it come to you via email?
Email. I get an email, the actual form comes to me, I'm asked to review it and concur that we would send an expedited release to the Department of State. And like I said, I've only seen about one a week. I anticipate that number accelerating with the larger number of cases that we have sent over to the Department of State. So to date, we have sent, I asked them to give me that today, I can tell you. So we have a certified eligible taxpayer that owes over $51,000 that meets the criteria. There's about 600,000 of those. We have legislatively mandated exclusions, approved installment agreements, approved offers and compromise, settlement agreements, combat zone, innocent spouse, and a CDP hearing. So those are all taken out. And then discretionary. So we have CNCs. We had a lot of disaster zones last year. Those are taken out. Deceased, ID theft, bankruptcies, and then pending installment agreements, pending offers, and pending claim adjustments. And so the total number that we're looking at is about 360,000, and we've sent about 95% of those over to the Department of State. It's still too early to see how we're doing, since we're so early in the process. But I'm sure people will be looking to see how we implement and what the success is of the program. So that's Passport. So what are we doing to try to help you communicate with us? Like I had mentioned, Paul Mamo from Online Services is now the Director of Collection, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience for us to interact with taxpayers and practitioners digitally. So we started a small pilot, secure messaging pilot. We started that in correspondence exam, simple single issue audits. It was painful to start with. People weren't adopting in. We literally, so first we started with a stuffer, and people said it looked fake because we don't do stuffers. It was kind of fancy and bright colored. And so we revised that, and then we started actually calling taxpayers and saying, would you like to adopt in? So our pilot included about 9,100 taxpayers that we sent invitations to work their correspondence in a digital secured mailbox where we'd, message back and forth with taxpayers. And we saw some success. It's going to take time for us. It's all new to us. It's new to our employees. And so we've seen some successes. I'm committed to continuing to explore opportunities for us to work with taxpayers and third parties in a digital manner. And so our efforts next year will be about 20,000 people that we hope to get to work with us in a digital space. And so small incremental steps. It's not what we would like, but it's a start. We know that taxpayers and practitioners have had issues with authenticating themselves. Security is paramount. You heard this morning. Last year when I was at the tax forums, I never thought we'd spend so much time talking about ID theft and securing systems, securing emails. And I know for you, many people, when I've asked how many people have contingency plans, backup plans, if you ever had a breach. And so you're all dealing with that. And so we're very, very careful as we move into that digital space and making sure that the environment is safe and secure. So as we look at our operations today, as the commissioner of SBSE, we've got our field operation and our campus operation. I was a field revenue officer, so I never gave much thought to what our folks in ACS do in our campus operations, and they do a whole lot of work. And we have more work than we can handle in those campus operations. We hired 500 people in ACS this year. to help increase our level of service on the phones. We picked up a lot of calls from wage and investment last year. We picked up 8 million additional phone calls. And so we're doing balance due calls as well as our ACS calls. And so we're looking for opportunities and ways to help taxpayers get in earlier and not have long waits and not be abandoned on the line hours. And so we hired 500 people, but we're doing other things too. And one of the things that we're doing is looking at the letters that we're sending taxpayers. If you haven't received contact from the IRS and your case has been shelved, it's just sitting waiting for someone to work it. We have a letter, I call it the call me letter, and we couldn't answer the phones. And so we started to look at that letter. The first thing it said is call us. And then people got frustrated because they waited on the phone for 2 hours. And so we did some work with our research folks, and we're looking at taxpayer behavior. And we'll look at taxpayer demographics, and we're trying to send letters to taxpayers that would get their attention. And now we're trying to drive people to online. We absolutely want to provide service to taxpayers in the channel that's their preference. We're not ever going to do away with the phone assisters, but if we can help a taxpayer get the answer that they need without picking up the phone, it benefits them and us. So we started a text chat in ACS.
Talking about providing phone support, what happens to, what sort of recourse do we as practitioners have if you speak to a telephone assister and somewhere along the line the telephone connection gets disconnected by magic? I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse, I don't want to get the person in trouble, but maybe they need some training to extend the courtesy of saying either I'm hanging up or I can't help you or I'm transferring you or something like that. But we too are also on hold for I have 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah. So I can just give a little story. Last year I was up in San Diego, and a gentleman came up to me and said, listen, I was on the phone with someone in Kansas City for 2 hours and I couldn't get a resolution. And I thought, we can't afford to be on the phone 2 hours. And we have the ability, if we know where it is, the location, we can go and listen to that call. And we were able to identify that call and then reach back out to the taxpayer, the practitioner it was in this case. I can't say we can do it on every case, but if you spend an hour on the phone and you don't get a resolution or you got hung up, you need to contact us. We need to know those situations so that we can better prepare our employees that they're there to provide a service. You don't want to call 5 times. You want to get a resolution on that first contact. And so we're doing more training and more monitoring and hoping that our folks, and emphasizing customer service. I talk about it with the field folks. I talk about it with the campus folks. But in that instance, we were able, I was able to get enough information from the taxpayer or from the taxpayer's representative, and we were able to look into that case because we don't want someone to be on the phone for 2 hours. You know, you can call, if it's a specific case, I don't want to say call me, but but it's at these kind of events that we can, you know, when I hear that, I can go back to our director of campus collection, who is Beverly Upperman, and we're going to engage Beverly in the tax forms this summer because the phone service is critically important. So let me just talk about what we're doing on the phone. So now we're sending letters and asking people to do a text chat with us. We're not doing PII data, but we're helping to direct taxpayers, and the numbers are astounding. So we are, so the call deflection rates from the beginning of the pilot in April are as follows. So we've deflected 61% of the calls to online payment. Now we know online payment has its issues, but we've also been able to deflect another 71% by doing the text chat. We can exchange information, not specific to the individual taxpayer because it's PII data, but we can generally answer questions in that text chat environment. We've done 10,000 since April. Our goal is to increase that and to give taxpayers the option to do a text chat with us or to call and wait on the phones. Our level of service, we just brought on another 200 people last week. We know taxpayers filed their returns. We're deep in our installment agreement inventory at the campuses, trying to get those done. And so we just brought on some folks from Wage and Investment. They're helping us to work through that inventory.
Yes, I hadn't heard about TextChat. Some of those announcements.
So it's in those 5972 letters. It's our annual reminder letter. Last year we didn't send very many because we couldn't answer the phones, but we have started back up sending those. We started in April. It's just a reminder letter to the taxpayer, you have a liability. It's the 5972C letter.
You mentioned about that, tracing that 2-hour phone call. Does that mean that all the calls to PPS and ACH are recorded?
We do contact recording. I don't know if we do 100%, but we can zero in on calls so we've had taxpayers and employees. There have been some not so nice exchanges between employees and taxpayers and employees, and we can pick up on those calls, certain voice recognition. We don't do 100% analysis of those calls, but we can find a call if there's a problem. So we have a contact recording system.
With most of the calls are recorded then?
To our ACS site. I'm not sure about PPS, but in our ACS environment, we have to make sure that our employees are providing good customer service. And
Not local offices?
no.
There's such a discrepancy. You call in the PPS, the ACS line there, and you get to an agent, you fax in a POA, it's not on file, you start going over all these case details, and then they go, oh, it's over 25,000, I can't do 25,000, let me transfer you somewhere else. And then you get to that person and you fax your POA again, because of course they can't move it between them, and you look through all your case details, and they go, oh, it's over 50,000, let me transfer you again. Are they going to get to a point where everyone is at every level up to 100 or whatever it is in one phone call?
That's our goal. The calls are gated, and so I know there's many selections that you get through a call, but we'll take that back as feedback. The POA situation, it's been one. I've been back in small business since 2013. It's the number one complaint that we get is all of you do the 2848s multiple times, and so that's high on our list of digital capabilities where we will be able to get your POA once and not 5 times.
Let me follow up on that. There is a problem with the POAs in that one agent, you're on with PPS, they'll tell you, oh no, you have to get a new POA for your client, you have to say this on the line, you send it into them, then you talk to somebody else, they want something else on the line, but same case, you send that into them, and then they send it off to the CAP unit, the CAP unit rejects it because it has that on there that the agent wants.
Okay, I'll take that. That's good feedback. But we know the POA is an issue. Hopefully when we have enterprise case management, we've been working really hard on having one case management system. The POA, will be housed in the case management system, and that anyone that needs access would see it. I think there's a question.
The person answering the phone just said, how much do you owe? Or when we transfer you, or what I do is I call, more than $80,000. You know,
Okay. I'll pass that along to our field, to our campus folks. I think there was one more question here.
In regards to the POAs, since the world is becoming more digital, is the IRS looking at being able to allow our clients to sign it digitally in the future?
In the future, absolutely. But in the future, authentication and security is paramount. So, tax reform kind of threw us a curveball. We had a list of priorities of things that we were working on in the digital space. Taxpayer account is one, digital communication, the ability to upload documents, and our priorities have changed to implement tax reform.
So how will all this be fixed? Bring us back that we can go back onto e-services to get the 2848 signed electronic, right then and there instead of waiting all this 3-5 days. That's how you can fix that problem.
And I appreciate the comment. We'll take that back to our folks that work the CAF and the POA unit. So I just said something about tax reform. So SBSE, we have 29 provisions. that we've got to implement, some retroactive, some moving forward. There are updates regularly on the tax reform website. And so we've got people, we've got about 40-plus people in SBSE, mostly exam folks working on tax reform, working really, really hard. They've done a great job. There's lots to look at, lots of guidance that has to be written, working with council and working with Treasury. And so we've got 29 provisions. I was going to talk about a couple of them because some of them went into effect right away and some of them are delayed. But we're working really closely with our tax implementation office. Tammy Ripperter, the deputy from SBSE, is working on that team, as well as Sunita Lowe from TEGE. They lead that team. And there are, the latest updates are at the IRS Gov /tax reform, and so there have been updates today. I'll give some of those updates as I go through, but so some of the things that we're doing, there's a new tax credit for the employer credit for paid family and medical leave, looking at guidance there. Opportunity zones, which is really interesting. There were updates just today, this afternoon, on opportunity zones. It's economically distressed communities where new investments under certain conditions may be eligible for preferential tax treatment. You can get the tax benefits even if you don't live in that area, work or have business in an opportunity zone. You just have to invest in that qualified opportunity fund. And they're across the country, again, on our website.
Do you have any idea as to when when they're going to update the implementation of the qualified business deduction?
Yeah, they haven't been done yet, and it's daily that we're getting updates. We're getting updates every single day, and I don't know. I got an email this morning saying the opportunity zones would be posted today. 199 Cap A is huge for SBSE. What? Yeah, right. It's the biggest. We anticipate 40 million taxpayers could use that. And so we're pushing hard, working with Council and Treasury on guidance. We did get some guidance out about 10 days ago, and we're continuing to update daily as we get updates from our attorneys and from Treasury and OMB as well. There's a lot of moving pieces in tax reform, and so we're moving as fast as we can. We didn't get a lot of time, and so like I said, you need to be going to our website often to look at the updates.
Regarding, you said all these new people and planning the phones and ACS, is there any plans or provisions to improve the practitioner priority line, to give them back some authority, to even set up installment agreements? Because if anything is in ACS, they can't touch it. And for most things, they really just refer you back out. So after you spend about an hour or so to try to get through to somebody, then you get transferred, and then 50% of the times you get disconnected. So it's just to set up installment agreements that are under $50,000 or under $25,000.
And that's because they're in ACS.
ACS, yes, mainly because of that.
Okay. I'll take that and see if I can. Sure.
If you have a question, please obviously wait for the person ahead of you to get their question answered. But please stand up and speak loudly. You got 2,500 people in this room, and they're only hearing 2 or 3 of them are hearing your question. They don't understand the answer to the question. So stand up and ask your question loudly when you ask it. Ready?
Okay, that's a very good question and something that we should look at. So I'll take that back as a suggestion. We shouldn't make it more difficult for you to set up an installment agreement. So I'll take that back as a suggestion that we do that on that line and see what kind of answer I get. In the back there?
Yes, I have a question regarding who gives the percentages to the news about how many people are being audited? The problem is it seems as though the revenue, at least through the news, encourages people to kind of let things slide because it says, oh, we're only 0.6% being audited. It's because you're playing with the numbers in terms of who's being audited and who's getting exam notices or who's getting informational notices, which are all basically audit notices. So it's really about 6% or 7%, not 0.6%. And by getting that news out, the average taxpayer, I hear it all the time from people, well, I'm not worried about being audited, they only audit less than 1% of the taxpayer.
Right, and that's field audit. And you're absolutely right. We do doc matching, which is our AUR program. Many of you see the CP 2000. You know, we work hundreds of thousands of those cases every single year. We also do correspondence examination cases out of our campus operations, and then we have our field audits as well. You know, those numbers are published annually, and it's field. It's not the whole number. So I'll take that back to our communication folks and ask them if there's a way to incorporate all of the notices. You know, the word audit, the doc matching program is really just a notification saying you may have not reported all your income. It's not a full-fledged audit. And so that is not considered.
Mary Beth, would it be fair to ask you a question on conservation easements, or would you rather I see you after the session?
I'd rather you see me after that, after the session. Conservation easement is an area that we're taking a hard look at. There's been lots of information out there on conservation easements, but I can talk to you specifically about conservation easements later. But we're extremely busy in SBSC. I tell folks we're the face of the IRS. Darren's going to talk about the importance of field work. We're seeing more and more complex cases in the field, large dollar cases. I think that we're doing a better job identifying cases in exam and in collection. I challenge Darren. We talk weekly on a case or two here and there, and the cases that we're seeing are much more complex in both collection and exam, and our focus is on those larger dollar cases. We shouldn't have cases, million-dollar cases, that we're not paying attention to or getting to timely. We're paying attention to them, but we need to get out in the field as quickly as we can with those cases. And so Darren's going to talk about some of the work that he's doing. It is difficult with fewer people. Our goal is to get more folks, but to get the right cases in the hands of the ROs. Darren spends a lot of time in the field. We were talking earlier, he's out at least once or twice a month. He's been out 76 times over the last couple of years with revenue officers making field calls, whether it's a trust fund interview, 4180, CIS's, he's been out there. I myself, I went out on a case a couple of years ago up in the Boston area. It was $1 million trust fund case, and I kept in touch with the revenue officer. It took a year to close that case. A year. We ended up getting a full payment, but it was a complex case. And so we're extremely busy. And now with tax reform and how we integrate that, all the changes that we have to make to our manuals and then training folks as we start to implement tax reform in the exam space. So we've been extremely busy. We really appreciate the feedback. I always learn something at these conferences. I take something back that I feel like that can help improve our service. So if there are specific questions that I can answer after the fact, I can at least take your information and point you in the right direction or have someone contact you. But I just want to say thanks. It's great to be here. First time ever coming to one of these meetings. Yeah, it's, believe it or not, people do email me, marybeth.murphy@irs.gov. Unfortunately, it'll go to Darren or it'll go to Brenda. If it's a collection issue, I ask that you try to work it through the chain. If you can't get the answer, that you think that you deserve from the manager, and we've encouraged our managers, they have an obligation to talk to the practitioners and talk to taxpayers. If you don't get that answer, go to the territory manager and the area director. I don't work individual cases ever, but we'll get people to respond to your request. We treat all taxpayers the same. And I don't get many letters or emails or contacts, but they do come in. And it's good for us to hear from you. That's why we come to these events.
Mary Beth and Darren, I'm a former RO, so I know how tough you guys have, and I wouldn't do your job. It's just the last 10 years have been a nightmare. So
Thank you.
I'm always worried about equity under law, and IRC 6330 is real clear. IRS is supposed to be as least intrusive as possible. And in 2017, I worked lean almost exclusively. In 2017, I think I saw a shift where ACS is filing more liens than they ever did. It used to be that the ROs in the field filed most of the liens, and I'm seeing a pivot. I don't know if that's anecdotal or if it's happened, but I can't get my head around how ACS might have a case for 5 minutes or 30 minutes, but not 3 days. So when they hang up, they're done. How can they balance? How is there any balance in filing a notice of federal tax? How does an ACS person who probably hasn't talked to the taxpayer or talked to them for 5 minutes decide that it won't hamper collection, or it won't end that business, or it won't? You understand what I'm saying? I'm concerned because I know you're under time constraints and you need to get the lien down to protect the government's interest. But how do you see it?
You know, we ask our employees to exercise, in some cases, a lien is warranted immediately based on the dollar amount. I'll take that question back to our operations folks at the campus and specifically ask about the liens. But you're right, we don't want to hamper collection. We don't want to hamper someone's ability. We've done lots of studies about the impact and effectiveness of federal tax liens. I know when I was an RO a very long time ago, it had a significant impact. It doesn't have that same impact today. And so we need to be careful and thoughtful about filing the lien. But the lien is an effective tool, as is the levy. How many people here have had a levy recently? Okay. I'd just like to ask that question on levies.
And I think the problem I have is when they get levied on a daily basis, when they're working with somebody like myself, trying to resolve the issue, we're still getting daily levies. And I think that's way over the top of we're supposed to be working with them.
And that's what the ROs in the field? The field? Darren's here, so he'll take that one. But that's good for us to know.
Yeah, and I had a case through ACS after having an offer and compromise denied, where alternative relief was requested, a installment agreement, but that was never considered, and had a heck of a time getting it through, and had to provide verification 4 different times that my client was in fact paying me through various levels, which I found to be fairly outrageous, since I'm not aware normally of attorneys saying they've been paid by a client when they had.
Okay. That's good feedback.
I'm also a former revenue officer at
Where at? What state?
Fort Smith, Arkansas. Anyway, you just said that we treat all taxpayers the same. And I wonder how, what's bothered me quite a bit is at ACS, they'll give you allowable living expenses of 150%. Revenue officers won't. How is that treating the taxpayer the same?
Well, that's good to know. We'll work on that as well. Thanks for the feedback.
I've got a follow-up on that. Because the relevance between an ACS, my client, can be under 25,000, lien's not filed. It goes to the field, and now it's the threshold's 10,000. There's no equity in the law.
They should all be 10,000. I'm kidding. Spoken as a true RO, right?
So if I can get my client's case wrapped up, I can get him down to the threshold or streamline or whatever, then I know he'll lien at ACS at $24,999. But if it has to squirt over to the field, then now I'm down to 10,000.
Yeah.
And that's luck of the draw. I mean, how is that equitable?
A good point. And we'll work that as well, Darren and I. Hopefully we don't have those cases in the field. But every once in a while we do get some of those. one more question, and then I think it's time for a break.
Question for you regarding ACS values. I was on with ACS last fall. It indicated to me, quoting in a roundabout way, that ACS was not issuing levies at that time or any longer. Is that the case?
No, that's not the case. That is not the case. We're still levying, as people raise their hands. Well, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to hang around with Darren for the next couple of sessions, but thanks for the work you do, and if you have any questions, feel free to stop Darren and myself after the session. Is it break time?
Larry, do they get a break before I start, or? No? Okay. Well, thank you, Mary Beth. So let me just pick up on where you left off with the question from Mary Beth a moment ago about ACS is doing this and the field does that. So you're probably familiar with the IRM, but just in case, if you write this down, IRM 5.19 is ACS's manual, and it talks about liens and levies there. And the ACS employees should be following that IRM. So it's 5.12 in the field for a revenue officer when we talk about, for instance, the lien. So if you want to see what the ACS employee or the revenue officer should be doing, it's promulgated. It's right there in the manual. Yes, sir.
Okay, so
I remember you. You're from Dallas, right?
so what should we do in a situation where the ACS tells us? Okay, now I'm standing up. See?
I warned Mary Beth that y'all were a lively crowd.
Okay. So what should we do in a situation where the ACS employee tells us, we don't follow the IRM in my department, and I say, well, I want to talk to your manager, not a problem, I'll make a referral over to the manager that he'll give me a call, but they never call.
So John, how many of you did I meet in the last couple of years at this event? So I give you my direct phone number at the end. And about 10 of you have called me in the last 2 years, and it's never been frivolous. It's always been a real good reason you called me, and I think there's about 8 of you, because I think John called me twice. I always followed up on it, and I think we got somewhere with it, or I was able to identify a particular manager or an employee that probably needed a conversation or training. So ACS, the campus, does not work for me. My peer, Beverly Thomas, is the director of campus operations. I'm not asking y'all, I'm not giving you her email number because I don't even know it. But if you call me with a situation like that, John, I will get you in touch with Beverly so that you could address those types of situations the same as I would if it was a field revenue officer. Yes, sir.
The other option is if you email your, at least in our area at Colorado, you email your stakeholder liaison, the person you spoke to's name and badge number, they will send you back their manager's phone number.
Oh, good to know. Thanks.
Okay. So Mary Beth pointed out that I've been out in the field. I've been on 76 different field calls in the last 3 years. So for those of you I haven't met before, I'm the director of field collection operations. I'm in essence a revenue officer. I carry credentials just like a revenue officer. I go out and work cases with them. So about every 5th stop, I'll say, can I do the 4180 interview? And I'll do the trust fund investigation and ask the revenue officer when we get back to the car, how'd I do? It keeps my skills up. I learn from them. I mean, the skills variance with over 2,000 employees, you can always learn something. Like Forrest Gump's quote about the box of chocolates. I mean, every taxpayer is different. Their situation, their circumstances, practitioners too. But I was out in the field a month ago in Texas, and it's been a long time since I've been out on a rural case, and I'm dressed in a suit, and we're in this big truck, and I'm 6'4", and I'm having to step up to get in this thing. It's like the monster truck. And I thought, well, this is kind of sturdy to be out making field calls to collect taxes. And revenue officer takes me out to this to this business, and that wasn't in the Dallas area. And we ended up going 12 miles down a gravel dirt road, and they had buzzards. I'm not kidding you, buzzards, just like in Stephen King movies. And we get out to the edge of this ranch, and we're assessing these assets, a herd of cattle and equipment and things. And when the truck stops, he's ready to hop out, and there are these 5 bad dogs that are circling the truck. And it's been a long time since I've been a revenue officer out there working my own cases. I'm used to going out on nice paved streets in Chicago and Los Angeles, and I'm on this clamshell dirt road 12 miles out in the middle of nowhere in Texas in a suit, and these dogs are barking and they're foaming and they look like they haven't had a bath in a while. And I thought, why did I agree to come out here and do this? And he just got right out of the truck and told the dogs to go away, and the dogs went away, and he was good. But I mean, I'm glad I do that, because I forget what my employees go through from time to time. I do have to deal with, from time to time throughout the year, either assaults or threats of assaults. That's not, and those of you who are revenue officers, you've probably all had at least one incident like that. I had a taxpayer. I was out with my manager in 1989, and I heard a snapping sound as we walked off this gentleman's porch who told us to go the heck away. He had pulled out his false teeth and threw them and hit my manager in the back of his head. But the false teeth, I'm not making this story up. And he was is that a nonagenarian if you're in your 90s? But he wasn't prosecuted apparently in Louisiana, which is where this happened. If you bite somebody, it's assault, but if you bite them with false teeth, it's aggravated assault. So if the teeth are removed from your mouth, what's that? Anyway, he apologized, and so it's never ceased to be an interesting job. What I'm going to do today is talk to you about where we are now in collection, mostly in the field, but if you want to talk about collection in general, I'm happy to do that. I'm going to talk about resource issues. What I didn't do, for those of you who are in San Antonio, that I will do today is I'm going to talk a little bit more, as Mary Beth pointed out, about the complex work that revenue officers that we're trained to do that we should be doing, and you're going to see more of that. And more than ever, taxpayers are going to need someone like you to help them navigate the system. For instance, if one of my employees shows up in your office or at a client of yours office before they're your client, and we're handing them a letter 903, face-to-face, we're telling them face-to-face, this non-compliant behavior you're demonstrating has reached a point where you're subject now to more significant civil or criminal sanctions. You can be sure the situation has reached a very heightened risk level, and the next step is for us to be referring this to the Department of Justice for a civil suit or criminal referral. So if you get a client who comes in and says they need your help, and ask them if they got a letter 903, and that will tell you the urgency. Yes?
Do I hear you saying you're going to be issuing more 903s now?
I'm going to get to that in a moment, yeah. So you'll see in a moment, we have been doing more fraud, and we've been doing more suits for injunctions. And those are, the suits for injunctive relief are always preceded with that letter 903 first. How many of you are familiar with a Supreme Court case, I think from 1977, called Tweel? Right? It's a case, it was an exam case, and the concern of the taxpayer was that the civil investigative process was in some way used to facilitate the criminal action that took place later, and was it fair to the taxpayer? Because the taxpayer was under the impression, or at least believed he was under the impression, that this was all going to be a civil matter and it wouldn't go criminal. So when I hand you letter 903, it's real clear, it's in writing. And I'm writing down in my history, I talked to you about this, I told you this could become criminal or civil sanctions, and it's going to get more serious. So you've been put on notice, face to face, and I've handed it to you. Yes, sir?
If we directly ask the revenue officer whether a case is, whether it's a parallel case, criminal case going on, are they required to give us the honest answer?
I was wondering if someone was going to ask me that. So here's the only answer to that question. If criminal investigation accepts a referral from me, I won't have that case anymore. I'm finished.
It can be parallel, I thought.
It could, I'm not familiar of anywhere with a revenue officer. I know with the revenue agents, there have been some parallel.
I worked parallel with the revenue officer.
You did parallel as a revenue officer? And if you were asked, you said,
I wasn't asked, but
right,
when they would say, are you looking at this criminally, I say, I'm always looking.
yeah. I believe in the legal reference guide for revenue officers, and I apologize, I don't know that answer off the top of my head. I think that's covered in our procedures about how to respond to a direct question like that. Yes? Revenue officer. The revenue officer, it's letter 903, and the Department of Justice helped us with the language that's in it. So it's specifically designed to be used as a piece of the case that helps us in litigation later. Now let me be clear, and I'm getting way ahead of myself. I'm going to get to all this in a moment. No one's trying to put anybody in jail. No one's trying to get an injunction to compel you before a federal judge to stay in compliance. That letter is really designed to say, hey, this is really, really serious. Stop doing this. And if the taxpayer stops doing it, none of that stuff happens. But that's the almost always last stage before we start pursuing the really serious, behind-the-scenes sort of legal type things, whether it's civil or criminal. Yes?
So, in some jurisdictions, for lawyers, it is an ethical violation for an attorney to attempt to reach a civil settlement by threatening criminal action. And it seems that with the threat of a civil matter and a tax matter turning into a criminal case, the IRS is kind of skating close to what is very plainly barred for some professions.
Okay, did y'all hear the comment? Thank you. So what the letter 903 is doing is simply telling a taxpayer who is more than likely unsophisticated in these matters and what can happen next if they continue, for instance, in the case of pyramiding payroll taxes, we're simply pointing out to them the law, the regulations, the procedures say that if this type of egregious behavior continues, these certain things can happen. So the letter doesn't say do this or else. It's just putting you on notice that if you continue, these are the next steps that are coming. It's just basically the law that we're reminding them of. And have a look at letter 903. If you see something in it that you think is flawed or goes in that direction, let me know about it, because I was involved in the last edit of it a few years ago. So now, trying to keep an eye on the time, I'll give you all a break at 3:50 in case you're wondering. I will not be successful at moving the screen. There we go. So these are the things I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the challenges that are facing us. You heard Mary Beth speak to some extent about those already across the IRS, but even about revenue officers. I'm going to talk about our challenges and what our priorities are. I'm going to tell you specifically why they're priorities. I'll get deep in the weeds about that. Why are we working this kind of case? Why do we talk about it so much? I'm going to talk about a lot of complex work. And as Section 1204 covered employees, when I talk about complex work for a field revenue officer, it's almost always enforcement. It's not the kind of product that a customer wants to have, goes out shopping for, right? There are some things, alternatives to liens, offers in compromise, that you come looking for help that we can help you with that are certainly amenable, but by and large, they're the kind of things that a taxpayer would not see as a positive development in their business or their personal life. But I'm going to balance that with talking about some of the amenable alternatives to this, especially the offering compromise. Last time I spoke with you all, I don't think I spent as much time or much time at all talking about offers in compromise. I'll do that a little bit more today. The offering compromise specialists do not work for me, but frequently an offering compromise does start with my employees. We're trained to get that process started. I was involved in writing the offering compromise regulation back in 1998 and 99 after the Restructuring Act. So I'm somewhat comfortable talking about it. So I'm happy to do that later. So I want to balance the conversation. I mean, this is the point that I want to make again. Enforcement I mean, my employees are civil enforcement officers. It's a misnomer that they're tax collectors. ACS hires tax collectors. They work the phones. They are incredibly good and efficient at collecting taxes at very low cost to the American public. I'm in the behavior modification business. Well, no, I don't mean that in an ominous way. I mean, just look at the work we do. The vast majority, I'm helping people get agreements, or I'm proving that they're a hardship, etc. There's a certain type of case that should be coming to the field. There's a certain type of taxpayer that only working face-to-face with the IRS is what it takes for that employee to become long-term compliant. We'll talk quite a bit about that in just a moment. Enforcement, I tell my employees this every single month when I'm out there with them in the field, when I'm having town halls. Enforcement's never our first resort. It's always our last resort. I don't want a single employee working for me who gets a kick out of, even if it's appropriate, and I'm sure it was, but you shouldn't feel good about levying someone's bank account or their wages or seizing their property. Taking an American citizen's property. That should always, without a single exception, be a big deal. And only done when we absolutely reach that point where it's the only thing left that's appropriate. We've tried and we can't get the taxpayer to become compliant. I'll talk about the limited number of ROs I have. I'll talk about the resource challenges, and I'll talk about how, because of that, in a way, it's kind of helping us focus us on what's really important and getting very, very good at the basics, which for a field revenue officer is the complex casework. And again, I'll just briefly talk about online payment agreements. It's the future, I think. Paul Mamo, the new Director of Collection, was just recently Director of Online Services. That online payment agreement, think about it. If you can resolve your case without having to talk to the IRS on the phone, and I've heard quite a bit about that just a moment ago, or having to meet one of my employees unannounced, wouldn't that be a much better way to resolve the case if you could just go online if they owe less than $50,000 and it just goes away?
If it works.
Yes, exactly. So the authentication rate is still a bear, us getting our heads around how to make sure that a successful authentication and being able to navigate that online payment agreement happens. But I won't mention it briefly, but only briefly for that very reason. We know we've got some more work to do on it. Yes?
Yeah, I believe I understood that the cost of doing that yourself online without assistance from IRS is something like 30?
Yeah, if you do a direct debit installment agreement for an online payment agreement, the cost is $31. Yeah, so it's cheaper. But to the gentleman, I'm sorry, what's your name? Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, to Mark's comment, he's absolutely right. I mean, I think the success...
To do one online.
The success rate, I think, is somewhere in the 30-something% range. That's not great.
We do it every day.
Yeah. And it works?
The online payment, online
Online payment agreement.
clients are overseas, we do it almost daily, and
Wow.
we get about 95% success rate.
Wow.
No, payments, making payments.
Maybe you should give all the people in here... Okay.
I'm talking about payment.
Oh, okay. Yeah, direct pay is what you're talking about. Okay.
I thought you were talking about payments.
So, let's start with talking about the resource issues that I'm facing. So, Mary Beth talked about when she was a revenue officer, there were 7,500 revenue officers. Yeah, there were about 9,000 revenue officers when I started back in the 1980s too. I'm only going back to 2010, but note, now this isn't all of our staff. This is only field-going, what we call bag-carrying revenue officers, the revenue officers who work your cases. In 2010, we had almost 4,100. As of October the 1st, 2017, we were down to 2,364. And as of last week, I am down to 2,223. That's attrition of about 9%. It's 8.7% attrition just in the past year. But overall, It was 42% attrition between 2010 and 2017, and that number is ever greater now. It's probably in the 43-44% range now. These are employees who are retiring, and they're not all leaving when they're eligible. Many are staying beyond their retirement eligibility date, and yet this is happening, and it's a significant concern for us. We have, if you're curious about the amount of work we have 1,066,000 cases in our queue. 1,066,000. When I talked to you all last year in San Antonio, I had 940,000 cases in my queue. So what is that telling you? My customers, that number is not a static number. I have people signing up to be my customer every week. That number continues to grow. At the same time, the number of my resources continues to decline.
Do you have a recruitment problem?
Yes. Recruitment? Yes. Well, we hired a little over a year ago 241 revenue officers. And that I lose between 200 and 300 a year. It wasn't enough to even make up for attrition that year. I'll tell you this, though, what you're going to see going forward in the future. I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I'll just mention this now. If you want to be a revenue officer, something that you and I didn't have to do when we applied back in the 80s or 70s or whenever you applied, there's a writing skills test. Here's why. If you read the position description of a field internal revenue officer, they're supposed to be able to detect subterfuge, work suits, draft complex written rebuttals to appellate protests and things. You have to be able to express yourself in writing at the level that the Internal Revenue Manual is written. Okay? Now, it's not a bestseller at any library, all right? But it's pretty clearly written. The training material is written at that level. In order for you to learn the job and matriculate now to the grade 11 journey level, which is the new journey level, that's the first position description that starts talking about technical writing. There's no point in me hiring people that are going to struggle and they're not cut out for doing that kind of basically legal writing work. So there's a writing skills test. And we implemented it a year or two ago. And it just by coincidence, we had to be able to hire 241 people. 14,000 people applied for those 241 jobs. 2,500 met the basic qualifications. 943 passed the test. And I picked 241 from that. So you're going to start to notice year after year the type of RO you meet is going to be a lot more like the ROs we were many, many years ago, 70s, 60s even, etc. I want people who have an intellectual curiosity, who are extremely polite and courteous, but can react deftly, detect subterfuge, can express themselves in writing in a way that's understandable to you to help you navigate your problems. Does that mean that these people will have somebody said, I wouldn't want to do your job. I love this job. But you have to have a thick enough skin. I mean, it's sad sometimes what you see and what you hear when you're in someone's business or in their house. But you've got to be able to control those emotions and at the same time you're trying to get the taxpayer and sometimes their practitioner to a place where you can have a good professional conversation and reach a resolution. So my hope is that 2 years from now, the revenue officer field force that you see is just only continuing to get more and more professionalized. Not that it's not now, it is. But as Mary Beth pointed out again, our work is becoming more complex. If I'm going to have revenue officers who are going to be on a witness stand in district court and places like that, I need to make sure that we're hiring people who have the aptitude to become that kind of revenue officer. How much work can I go through? I can work with those 2,223 ROs, I can work about 178,000 cases a year. Out of 1,066,000. So does everybody see sort of when we talk about resources, and I'm only talking about field collection operations, I'm not talking about ACS or examination, just the field cases. This is the field force that I have to deal with that volume of work. 69% of the high risk, the high priority work in my queue is businesses. It's corporate and partnership work. So I have to have a workforce going forward into the future that can deal with that complexity. Y'all know what this number represents? 60, yeah.
I just had a question. Of those high priority cases, of those 69%, how many of those are trust fund recovery cases?
I don't know the exact number, but it's most of them. The vast majority of them would be 941 liabilities. So the 60 represents $60 billion in taxes withheld in trust on behalf of the United States by the nation's employers. That's not paid. These are 941 liabilities on our books that aren't paid. A pretty significant issue. That's as of March the 31st, 2018. Historically, the way that we recoup these funds is revenue officers. They're the first line of defense in dealing with non-compliance with this segment of the revenue. However, you've seen just a moment ago on the graph over 42% attrition. And working a case like this, how many of you have worked a payroll tax, an employment tax case? You know what I'm talking about. I try to collect the money. If you can't pay, we try to set you up on an installment agreement. We try to make sure that you're not pyramiding or adding more liability to that existing balance due account that you have with us. We get financial statements, we do these long interviews. It's a lengthy process, right? It could take up to several months to over a year to work each and every case. And I've got 1,066,000 cases waiting. I've got 2,223 people to work them at a click of about 178,000 case closures a year, of which about 59% are businesses. So that's the dent I'm making in that 69%. Am I throwing too many numbers your way? The bulk of our work, to summarize it, is business, and it's payroll taxes. My resources are declining, and there's your gap. About 69% of my high priority work involves businesses, and I'm closing about 59%. That's the rate. So let's talk about the source of that revenue for a moment and why it's a priority. I told you I was going to tell you why it's a priority. So the IRS brings in over $3.5 trillion annually, and we're over 90% of all the money that funds our great republic. So I want you to see it expressed here on this pie chart that I think you all have. I'm not sure, y'all have a printout of this in your binders? Okay. In any event, the purple and the red piece of the pie, these are the taxes withheld in trust by the employers. It's 72% of all that revenue, of the 93%. This is what funds everything, guys. This is Medicare, Social Security, income tax withheld. I should note that this is one area of the Internal Revenue Code where a tax that's not received by the Internal Revenue Service, we're still obligated to push that money out in the way of income tax refunds, right? And Social Security benefits. This directly contributes to the nation's deficit. Yeah, I don't know, Larry, is there a plan to share these slides with any of the people? We'll make sure you get them, okay? I'll hang around for a little while after it's over, and if ASTPS wasn't planning to send them to you, I'm happy to send it to you myself, okay? Now think about it. Non-compliance in this segment of our nation's revenue stream is a significant risk to the Treasury overall, isn't it? Again, this is why the priority. Why is 69% of my available high priority work businesses? Well, gang, this is why. This is the biggest piece of the whole enchilada, basically. So, over the past several years, we've had to make a lot of tough decisions. $900 million in budget cuts. You heard about the attrition and the 13,000 employees we've lost. We're having to cut back on this and cut back on that. But one area where we are not going to compromise and not give up our priority is in payroll taxes, but I want you to understand why. It's not that we have a particular interest in being intrusive with this section of the taxpaying public. It's because, gang, this is what funds the United States of America. It's that plain. It's huge. I want to talk about who it matters to. This is a slide from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It shows you the survival rate of small businesses from 1994 through 2015. How many of you represent a small business? You have a family member or a friend who works for a small business. Bureau of Labor Statistics will tell you that over 50% of Americans work for a small business. My wife ran a small business. She did that for 22 years. She had about a dozen employees. And when people who owed her money weren't paying her for 100 days, etc., where'd she find the money to pay them? She went to the bank and borrowed, or she had it put away somewhere, but she made sure everybody got paid. But man, that was stressful. I'd watch her come home and be in tears and tell me, I got to pay this, you know. So-and-so, one of my employees, has a kid who's got, you know, these dental bills, root canals and stuff, and they're only making $30,000 or $40,000, $50,000 a year, but that's what keeps a roof over their head. And the people who start these small businesses, you've seen them, right? It's a lady who's got $200,000 equity in her home, and she borrows against all of it because she wants to have her own bakery and make muffins. Or they open a dry cleaning business, or it's a fellow who never went to college, but man, he excelled in shop and he could look at an engine block and fix a truck without opening a book. And he gets $70,000 from a life insurance policy when his dad dies of cancer. And he takes every penny of it and he opens a garage and starts a business and he creates jobs for 10 people. And what you see in our country is over and over again, this is how they employ half of Americans or more, people taking that risk. And they create jobs and that keep a roof over their head and put food on the table for more than half of our fellow citizens. And y'all, these aren't my customers. Yeah, they're in here somewhere, but the vast majority of these businesses are doing it right. They're paying their taxes. They're finding another way to get the money if they're short. And what did 94% of them tell the IRS Oversight Board when we still had one in place in 2014? 96% of them said that they want the IRS to address people who aren't playing by the rules because they've got an unfair business advantage, right? I mean, if I stole $200,000 in payroll taxes I withheld from my employees, which is basically what it is, right? And I use that for advertising, do I have an unfair advantage over another business that's not advertising because they're having to cut corners? And how did these people get into this shape in the first place? Any clues? When you have a client like this who owes 941 taxes, how they got there?
Undercapitalized.
Yes, thank you. Undercapitalized. They got a great idea. I'm great at fixing cars, so I obviously can run a car fixing business. You know, they've got a dream. It's America. They want to start a business. They have a skill or a vision, or they're great at leading people, and they start the business, but they don't have the funds put away for a rainy day. Or maybe I met one fellow who ran a healthcare business, and man, he just kept hiring relatives. Every time a relative needed a job, he'd hire them. Not a nurse, no problem. You're a nurse now. And just a heart of gold, but he kept hiring people, and his overhead exceeded his receipts, and he'd get behind and think, I'm going to catch up, right? And next thing you know, I'm knocking at the door. And they're not caught up. So look at what happens, though, when you look at this graph. At about year 4, almost half of them, look at how remarkably similar this is. Year after year, 1994 through 2015, over half of them are closing their doors. Not because they're one of my customers, not because they're falling behind on payroll taxes, just the normal ebb and flow of capitalism, right? of the economy being strong, being weak, people having more money to spend at restaurants or their dry cleaning versus washing their own clothes, etc. And they close up shop and they go to work for somebody else, and maybe their house goes into foreclosure and they go and live in an apartment. But for 4 years they risked everything and they created jobs for half of the people that we see when we walk outside. And my employees owe it to them, because this is our country basically. That's it. We owe it to them to make sure that everybody plays by the same rules. So let's talk a little bit about where these taxes come from. And you'll probably already know this. The trust fund taxes are coming from the FICA, the Federal Insurance Contributions Act taxes, which are the Medicare and the Social Security, and the withheld income taxes. Some of the employment taxes are also FUTA, or Federal Unemployment Tax Act taxes. Another part of the trust taxes is the Railroad Retirement Act taxes. Now, if you had to represent somebody with regard to a federal tax deposit penalty, anybody? It's probably the first and the earliest stage where we're taking enforcement action. Is we assess a penalty. If it's 1 to 5 days late, it's a 2% penalty. If it's 6 to 15 days late, it's 5%. And once it gets to day 16 or beyond, it's a 10% penalty. So if you've got a $200,000 payroll, right, you got a $20,000 penalty, which can sometimes be quite a bite. And a $200,000 payroll and a quarter is not that huge for some businesses, right? So a $20,000 bill from the IRS would not be welcome. So these taxes are important. So real important, as I've been talking about. So how do we recover these taxes? The trust fund recovery penalty. It's one of the most important tools that we have. It's in IRC, Internal Revenue Code, Section 6672. How many of you knew that the origins of this penalty reached the century mark this year? 1918. Don't know that? Yeah, if you want to Google it, the Revenue Act of 1918, Section 1308. So Section 1308, now keep in mind back that we're trying to pay for the First World War, and it's terribly expensive. Congress has figured out a way to collect taxes at the source. So what do we do if people decide to keep that money they collect versus turning it over to the Treasury Department? And they wrote a statute that became law that basically allowed the then Bureau of Internal Revenue to assess a penalty equal to 100% of the amounts withheld. If we can determine through our investigation that the person was responsible and willful, we can pierce the veil of the corporation. It was a big deal in the history of our country in tax administration. That statute is later modernized in 1943, I think, in 1954, and it becomes Section 6672 and Section 7202. One is civil, one is criminal. The original statute, 1308, had both the 100% penalty and a criminal provision. So when time goes on in the 1950s, now you got a statute, you get the criminal piece on 7202 and the civil piece on 6672. So if you look at them side by side, they're almost mirror image statutes, and that's the reason why. They have the same parent. The reason I'm sharing that history with you is this is a really important responsibility that the revenue officer has to make sure that we're doing this right. So these interviews that we do to determine who's responsible and willful for a century, when Congress gives the tax authority that much authority, we want to make sure that it's used when it's appropriate, because it's a big deal to say to the corporation, no, now you owe that liability too, 100% of it. So we've got to prove responsibility and we've got to prove willfulness. Yes?
Must the interview be held in person and you submit a written 4182 to the revenue officer without actually having this?
It's not unheard of. I'm about to talk about the 4180 in a little while here, but it's preferred that it's done face-to-face. I think some former DOJ people here in the room would happily tell you they'd really like for me to be asking those questions eye to eye with you. It's really important. It gives me a chance to ask you 2 or 3 times, are you sure that's the answer? Because people aren't perfect. They make mistakes. They forget things. Do you want to change that answer? Yes?
What if the person is willing to take responsibility and say, yes, I am the responsible person, I don't want to interview, just assess them?
Let me sign a 91
Then they can do that.
But without the interview?
If they want to sign the waiver of us asserting the penalty, yes, they can do that.
I'm actually dealing with a case right now where I said, listen, we're all responsible, we want to move forward, we got plenty of other stuff to deal with. And they're forcing the 4180. It's an international client in Samoa. And I'm like, we're wasting a lot of time. We agree, we'll sign the form, and they're refusing.
Well, one of the reasons to still do the interview is to determine are there other responsible persons. Caroline, you had a... the gentleman here was mentioning that he's got a client, international client, that doesn't want to do the 4180. They're more than willing to sign something, I'm sure, to assure the IRS, look, we agree, we're responsible for the payroll taxes. So the question, though, is, so will that help you avert the need for a 4180 interview? If I'm the revenue officer, maybe, maybe not. Now, I've got access to all kinds of other information through third parties, bank signature cards, copies of canceled checks, Secretary of State and corporation records, and on and on and on. If I'm convinced you're the only corporate officer and you're willing to agree that you're responsible, that's probably good enough. But if there are other people who are potentially responsible and they're not raising their hand saying, yeah, I'm responsible too, then I need your testimony on that form to help me build that case.
Well, here, if you're getting the money. Isn't that the purpose of it? How about we're going to spread this thing out?
If Jeffrey asked me, why would you care if you're getting the money? If you write me a check, I won't care. Now, if you tell me, I'll give you the money, what was the Popeye guy, I'll give you a hamburger, or pay on Tuesday. Believe it or not, quite a few of my customers are my customers because they said they'll pay and they didn't. So it happens. Yeah, I don't mean to be flippant about it. I mean, it's especially with businesses, people don't always keep their commitments. One of my jobs is to protect the government's interests, to protect the Treasury of the United States. So I have a number of tools to make sure that money that's due to be in the Treasury, and as you can see what I pointed out earlier, this is money this is money for Social Security, income tax refunds, and Medicare. I have got to push that money out whether you brought it in or not. So the Internal Revenue Service sends me to go and make sure that money goes back into the Treasury Department. Now, if your client's willing to say, hey, I'll pay the trust fund now, great. No 4180 interview, no trust fund penalty. But if they're not, if they want time, we'll still do the interview. Frequently what we'll do is set the penalty up and hold it in escrow, and we won't use it unless you the business, default on the agreement. That's a possibility too. And Larry asked me to do this when I started, and I forgot because I picked up where Mary Beth left off answering your questions, but try to keep specific case questions down so that we can finish up the presentation. I think we're still doing fine because we've got a second segment where I can pick up where I left off, but we got 6 minutes before your break. So one more question before I move on. I apologize. I think someone back here had their hand up first. No, I guess it was you. Randall?
What's the driver, or what's the tipping point for taking a case from section 6672 over to 7702?
All right, so 7202 is the woeful failure to pay statute. It's the criminal aspect of the trust fund penalty issue, or trust fund taxes, excuse me. So what's the threshold between whether it's criminal or whether it's civil? The short answer to that is, will criminal investigation take it as criminal? So it's public information. I would direct you to a TIGTA audit of about a year ago, the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, maybe it was 2 years ago, where they're talking about all the trust fund penalty cases worked by my folks and why aren't more of them worked criminally. So geographically, and I used to be an appeals officer, I can tell you that trust fund penalty cases, if I'm in the 9th Circuit, what's responsible and willful looks a little bit different than what's responsibility and willfulness in the 5th or the 11th Circuit. And from a criminal standpoint, and I'm not a criminal agent, but my understanding is around the country, criminal investigation has to investigate cases they believe the Justice Department will prosecute, and the Justice Department is going to take cases based on what they believe individual courts, districts around the country are looking for. So what gets a conviction and incarceration in one district is different than some other places, so that's a factor. Those aren't factors that my employees care about. My employees just work the case, and if we think that it's willful and it's egregious and we think it should be prosecuted, we're going to refer it to CID. It doesn't matter whether or not they're going to take it. The fraud technical advisor will guide us on whether or not the special agent in charge in that office will take that case, but we're still going to develop those badges of fraud. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Building
Kenneth.
on that, because 6672 and 7202 mirror each other so closely,
Yeah.
and you just said you're going to refer it to see if they take it, that 4180 interview can be used as evidence in a criminal case.
Yeah.
And our clients have Fifth Amendment rights not to incriminate. Why would we ever allow our clients to do a 4180?
And even
It
worse.
could go criminal.
So
Right.
if we
Why would
represent
we
our
ever do
client, if we represent our client effectively, we say, do not take a 4180 interview.
Because it can, now, if you would
Right.
issue
And
me
then
a
the
letter
RO
saying,
says-
we will not send this criminal, I'll do them all day long, but you won't do that.
And the
Why
RO
would want to
says-
use this against us, when we weren't read our
Right.
rights, and it's a Fifth Amendment thing, why would we ever do that?
So when you file a tax return, you sign it under penalty of perjury. So if you're committing fraud on that tax return, you've basically already incriminated yourself, and you wouldn't tell somebody don't file a tax return because you might incriminate yourself with tax evasion, right?
I would say don't file a fraudulent tax return.
Well, exactly. And a 4180 interview is not out to catch fraud. It's to determine who are the potentially responsible persons to get this money back into the Treasury in the event the business cannot do it.
Questions on top of what's on the form.
Yeah, it can't be a document that goes into the criminal side.
Right.
And
you
the other
sign
side
it.
of it isn't. So if I say, don't take the 4180 interview, it can be used to prosecute you later on. You signed under penalty of perjury. I'm the guy, okay? Then the revenue officer says to my client, if you're not going to take the 4180, I'm going to lien, I'm going to levy, I'm going to seize. Wow, I'm in a catch-22. If my client wants Fifth Amendment protection, you're going to seize the levy.
And that's what I say. So you're telling me you're going to, my client has to give up his Fifth Amendment rights, or you're going to punish him?
Well, I mean, these are the options. So if you refuse to give me, and practically, if you refuse to sit down for a 4180 interview, I'm likely going to summons you for that 4180 interview. And whether I get a 4180 interview or not, I've got many, many other avenues to secure evidence, right, et cetera, and determine whether or not fraud's been committed. And by refusing to sit down and talk to me, you've just added to potential indicia maybe of evasiveness, of being evasive.
I was also told that you can submit the 4180 interview, to go by what you're saying, they ask questions outside of the interview, which happens all the time. All the time, there's no exceptions. They try to, it's a fishing expedition. At least everyone that I've been on. So what we now do is we send the 4180, we get the form, we fill it out, we send it in beforehand with the documentation, we don't do the interview.
How do you get the form beforehand?
Download it.
You can get it on, there's places you can get it, okay? So let me ask you. So we'll take let me just make this one. Caroline, you had a comment to make? Right.
That's just going to be one piece. And it's going to be a judgment call. There are some practitioners that will never subject their client to a 4180. The client will get summons and you're going to have to revoke. And you got to make sure you know how to do that. You don't want to walk in your client you've never revoked before. So talk to somebody else who's done it and learn how to do it. But that in and of itself will not result in a referral. Because key selection is so important.
But it is a piece.
It's a piece.
If you've got my client's signature, it's a
I agree, and you know, I'm on the fence side now, it's a combination of things. You've got to find you pull out of the 6672 penalty. That 4180 may be the avenue to do it. So rather than do a blanket, never do it, do the facts and circumstances. You've got all these people in the room, collect business cards, talk to your friends, and then make the decision rather than a knee-jerk never.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm not going to ask you to mail it back to me. How many of you have ever been pulled over for a speeding ticket? What's your name? Van. Van's driving down the interstate, and I'm a police officer, and I pull Van over. And Van rolls down the window, and I say, Mr. Van, you were driving awfully darn fast. You're going to say to me what?
I'm just leaving the Sigma Chi house and was in a hurry to get back to the store.
And then you're going to ask me what? How fast was I going? I wasn't going up fast. How fast did you think I was going? And so, all right, Van, I don't know, but it looked awful fast. Here's a blank ticket. Now I want you to fill this in, and in 30 days send it back to me and tell me how fast you were driving. Well, Van, of course, is going to send me something probably saying he was driving 65 miles an hour, right?
You bet.
Is Van going? So why would I want this isn't a 4180 is not just a form, nor is a 433A or a 433B. This is super important because this is just the truth. It's a script for an investigative interview. If you live in Maine or you live in California or you live in Louisiana or Minnesota, you shouldn't have to feel like the IRS is any more or much less intrusive than in some other part of the country. Those forms were designed around questions that need to be addressed to address those statutes and ability to pay, and it shouldn't be different by any state that you live in. And in one question, then we'll take a break.
So in reference to this, so you go through the 4180 interview, you have determined that your client has an inability to pay. My understanding is per the IRM, if it's determined that the client is non-collectible, then it should be recommended that the trust fund penalty not be assessed. How does that work exactly, or what?
Yeah, that's a great point, David. That's something I'm really trying to emphasize for employees. I should not see trust fund penalty recommendations where the collectability has not been addressed up front. So if you believe, and it is outlined in the Internal Revenue Manual, in the Form 4183, which is the internal document we use to get the manager's approval to assert that penalty, the revenue officer's got to check a box that it's collectible or not. Now, collectible, not collectible now, if we think it might be collectible because of special considerations, maybe you're a lawyer.
Gentleman's 76, he's retired, he has only Social Security benefits.
Okay.
He has no property.
Yeah.
But the revenue officer still wants to assess.
No. If we're convinced it's never going to be collectible, we should check the box, not collectible, and recommend non-assertion.
And if he doesn't want to do that?
I mean, when you just described, without knowing everything, because some people live to be 106, but if the revenue officer believes it's their judgment that this is not going to be collectible in 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, no, we're not going to assert the penalty. We're going to check the box that it's not collectible, and we're not going to assert the penalty.
But if the revenue officer doesn't want to allow that, he's going to say, no, I still want to assess it.
That's why I put my phone number on the last slide. You just give me a call and let me know where that's happening. Larry. All right, y'all got a break until 4:10. 4:10. So welcome back, everyone. I think I scared a few people off with. I think they're worried there's going to be a 4180 interview coming up. Speaking of which, now I want to go into some detail about the process, about the 4180 interview. Just another, how many of you are familiar with the Form 4180? So did you ever wonder why that excise tax question or two is on that, in there, tucked in those 6 pages? It's kind of like a little dinosaur fossil that reminds you that this is a 100-year-old process, because back in 1918, the majority of the taxes that we were talking about were excise taxes. So the 100% penalty interview, which is what it was, I guess, at the time, was really all about the excise taxes. And to some extent, there still are some excise taxes that are subject to the trust fund recovery penalty. So that's why those 1 or 2 questions are still there. So if you ever thought, like I did when I was a revenue officer, why in the heck am I asking that question? That's why. It goes back to the original 1918 law. So I mentioned that 69% of the available high priority work that we have in field collection involves businesses, and the vast majority of that are 941 taxes, these withheld trust fund taxes. So the first step in a case like this is a detailed, probative, investigative interview. We kind of jumped ahead on that. We were talking about it a lot before we took our break. How many of you have been in a trust fund penalty interview with the revenue officer? Anybody want to give me any idea about how long it takes? Because I've been in about 30 or 40 of them.
40 minutes.
40 minutes?
Couple hours.
5 minutes. Okay.
We did one out of South Carolina. She did it by phone. 2 taxpayers in Georgia, and I was in Virginia.
Oh, okay.
About 45 minutes.
All right. So this is the trust fund penalty interview is a 3-stage interview process. So when we show up out there, we're going to do a 433B interview. Right? That's a 4-page document to determine the business's ability to pay back the tax. Now, if we knock on the door and we say you owe what you owe, please pay me, and you write a check, we go away. We don't do any of that stuff. But if you don't, we have to make a collectability determination, an ability to pay determination. It's a probative investigative interview. I mean, the A, the B, and the 4180, they all end under penalty of perjury. We want you to tell the truth. But we understand it's to the best of your knowledge. So we may redirect and ask the questions 2 or 3 times, are you sure? And if you call us a week later and say, oops, you know what, I forgot a bank account, that's okay. All right? That process of securing the B and then the A, right? If you want an installment agreement, I'm going to get an A from the officer I'm interviewing, because what if the officer's got the ability to pay the tax? If you want me, the Internal Revenue Service, to believe in your company and extend an agreement to you, why don't you believe in the company and give it an agreement yourself and you pay the tax, potentially? Or what is your potential to pay the tax? So we do the A. And then there's the 4180 interview. I believe it's 6 pages. That whole process takes about 2 hours and 30 minutes. It should be that 3-tiered interview process. If there's 2 officers to interview, now you're talking about half a day to do that interview. So if I've got employees that can do that in 40 minutes, again, you got my phone number.
They didn't do the 433. They just wanted to assess responsibility.
They just did it. So what they're supposed, did they already have the A or the B?
No.
So when we do the 4180, the A and or the B has already been done.
Okay. They wouldn't need to.
And when I do the 4180, I do the interview with my client ahead of time.
Uh-oh. Oh, okay. So you know how to answer it.
We answer
Got it.
questions, I ask the questions.
I thought you were mailing it to me.
And then either I mail it to the revenue officer, or the revenue officer comes in and the taxpayer has.
Okay. Well, that's great. I mean, that's a great way to represent your client, to be familiar with those questions ahead of time and to go through them with the taxpayer.
Any surprises?
No, I don't blame you.
I've got some 4180 interviews scheduled for a week from Monday. The RO involved said that they were going to last 15 minutes, maybe 30 each.
Well, when you tell that revenue officer that you spoke with me today and I said it should take 2 hours and 30 minutes, because to go to, who was it that was telling me about the collectability determination a minute ago? David. I'm supposed to not just assess all this penalty. I need to, I'm not going to put an assessment on the Treasury Department's books that I know ahead of time isn't collectible, and I can't bury my head in the sand and not inquire as to whether it's collectible. I mean, you might have been in a bad accident and you're not employable at all, even though you're a responsible officer. But if you've got no assets for me to collect from or no future significant employment prospects, I'm not going to assert that penalty because I've determined you're not collectible. That's the 433A interview. So the A and the B and the 4180 are all necessary to deal with a payroll tax balance. Yes, ma'am.
Should the A and the B be done before the 4180 or all at the same time?
I would do the B first, and then I would, at the same time. So when I go out with a revenue officer, that's the manual. So if you read IRM 5.7, 5.7 covers the trust fund recovery penalty and these types of investigations. It walks the revenue officer through. And frankly, I was here, Mary Beth and I, speaking to a Unit 3 class, the more advanced training for the 241 people we hired. So they're trained to do it that way. So when they're out with me, working a case, they're doing it by the book. they're getting the A, the B, and the 4180, and I promise you, almost to a minute, it takes 2.5 hours. So, do people, as they move on in their career, when they're out there on their own, kind of improvise? Yeah, but a thorough and proper way to do this interview is the 2.5-hour interview, unless they've already secured the A and the B for whatever reason earlier. Yes, sir?
How do you do a 433A and or B without supporting documentation in 2.5 hours?
All right, so the answer to Ron's question, Ron asked me, how do you do an A and a B without supporting information in 2.5 hours? The answer is almost 100% in my experience, you don't get the supporting documentation. You leave them typically a Form 9297. It's a document request with the taxpayer saying, I need this, this, and that, whatever that supporting documentation is, and you send it to us later. And look, I make it clear to taxpayers, I know you just spent 2.5 hours with me, or even your representative, without the benefit of records open. So it's to the best of your knowledge. So if it turns out to be a little bit different or off by a month because the latest statement you didn't remember, that's not perjury. And we understand that. Yes?
In our part of the country, what we've seen with the ROs is they are assessing the penalty, and once it's assessed, then either that officer or a completely different revenue officer is talking about collectability.
I'm so glad you brought that up. What's your name?
Elliot.
Elliot. What's supposed to happen when I work your business, if I determine, let's pretend Elliot's the corporate officer, and you're in the commuting area of the business, you're within 50 or 100 square miles, a radius, right, of the business. Darren didn't just work ABC Corporation. Now Darren's going to get Elliot assigned to him and work Elliot too. And what I'm discovering in my operational reviews this year is that that doesn't always happen. It does happen most of the time, but a significant but smaller percent of the time, the employees are assessing Elliot, and Elliot is going into the hold file, the queue, whatever you want to call it, and then somebody else is getting the case to work Elliot.
In a different state.
Well, if you're in a different state, a different RO should work it.
I'm saying that the RO, that it's going to an RO in a different state.
Oh, wow, that's worse than I thought. So no, that shouldn't happen. So could you call me next week? Because I need to know about this. Not going to get anybody in trouble, but we're reminding people. In fact, I'm working with collection policy. We're getting additional guidance out now, reminding managers and employees, you work the whole case. You work the corporation and any responsible persons you asserted trust fund penalties against, unless they're outside of your commuting area, in which case they'll send a courtesy investigation outside of the territory of the area for somebody else to work it. It's been that way for 40 or 50 years. I don't know how that culture kind of creeped in. It's not the majority, but it's happening enough that it's on my radar the past 3 months. And I wouldn't have thought of that unless you brought it up, Elliot. So thank you. Yes?
One more. I worked a case just a couple of months ago in Texas, a trust fund case where the TFRP amount was like $1,700.
Oh.
And I'm dealing with the revenue officer. I said, don't you act in the best interest of the government? It's going to cost the government more than $1,700 to assess this. Why would you do that? Well, he was a repeater. He had a trust fund years ago, now he's doing it again. I said, but it's $1,700. And it's not in the best interest of the government. In my office, we assert everything. I said, well, why is your office different than every other office? This is what I get all over the country. Every office is different.
Yeah.
And she says, well, we're just doing it. And I said, listen, if you do it, I'll protest it. That'll cost you more money. If we lose that, we'll file a pro se tax work. That'll cost you more money. It'll cost the government $20,000 just to assess this. Why would you do that? Don't do that. That's stupid.
And Kenneth, you were a revenue officer, right?
Exactly.
So when you were an RO, you'd have never done that, right?
I would not have assessed $17,000.
But he worked for reasonable management.
Well, no. But so one of the reasons I like these events, it's easy. If I'm out doing operational reviews, I'm having town hall meetings, I'm having focus groups with employees and the union and managers, I'm in my own, but I'm still, it's better than being in a bubble in Washington, but I'm still inside my own echo chamber. Nobody's calling me up tomorrow saying, hey Darren, I screwed something up, I want to tell you about it. No one's going to do that. So by coming out and speaking directly with practitioners, when I hear things, I hear great things, but then I hear things that really trouble me. You know what? You got 2,223 people out there knocking on doors. They're not all necessarily on the same wavelength, but the goal is always to make sure that happens. So that's why I give you my phone number. And y'all haven't abused that. Like I said, in 2 years, I've gotten about 10 calls, and they've all been important. So if you're aware of things that you just know, it just doesn't smell right, that can't be the procedure, or you can see in the IRM, that's just not the way this should be happening. It's my job to reach out to their management chain and let them know about it. It's not going to get anybody in big trouble unless they really did something super bad, right? That's appropriate for them to be concerned about. But otherwise, it gives me a chance to remind people, you shouldn't be doing this anymore. And by the way, we're aware it's happening. Yes?
2 weeks ago in Florida, I had a revenue officer while I was sitting with a client, we were talking about all this. 3 times she said that the taxpayer should have paid the taxes rather than hiring an expensive lawyer. 3 times, but the 3rd time I said, you know, lady, that's very inappropriate and professional, and you have no idea who paid my fee, and it's none of your business.
Yeah.
But I was shocked how she said it, expected. I was a little flattered, but, you know. 3 times she said it.
Yeah. So again, that's the kind of thing, if I don't know about it, and I need actionable information.
You like name and phone number?
Well, I'll get the phone number, don't you worry, I just need the name. But yeah, if y'all could let me know that. Yes, sir. Ralph?
Do you always insist that the RO get backup docs for the A and the B?
No. No, I mean, if the information on the A and the B is reasonable, it just depends on how complex the financial statement is. So you might want, so if I'm looking at your car, and I'm thinking, looking at the assessment valuation book, I think it's worth $80,000, and you're saying, oh, let's just say your house. This is a real case I worked a long time ago in appeals. I thought the house was worth $200,000. The taxpayer said, no, it's got a cracked slab. Well, this is one thing we don't do, and tell me, I need to know if I get employees doing this. We don't crawl under your house. So if you've got a property inspector who can show me pictures of a cracked slab, I reduce the value of a house in an offer I worked in appeals by 30% additional because of the cost of pumping sand under the house and however they fix a cracked slab. But I would have never known that without that supporting documentation. So there's a range of why we would need supporting documentation. If it's a pretty clear-cut case on a wage earner and there's not a lot of assets, what kind of supporting documentation? Your wage statements, generally I've got that already, access to that.
So give it a shot without supporting docs.
Yeah, if we need, if you don't think we need them, don't send them, and if we do, we'll tell you why. Okay? Yes.
I just wanted to make one more comment about 4180. I have a client in Oregon, and they do not want to do the 4180. They don't want to do the 433 either. So I was working with the revenue officer. We don't have statute issues, and they started sending weekly payments into the trust fund. We talked to the revenue officer after about a month, set up a date when they had to pay the trust fund in full, which they did. And she says if they pay it by that date, they have until this date to pay the balance of the taxes, and then we're done. And it was a very short window. So that was the way we were able to deal with the trust fund in 4180, which made everybody happy.
Okay. So I know we talked about it quite a bit before the break. I mean, generally speaking, I'm insisting my employers are doing those interviews face-to-face, and what you're going to start to see, just giving you a heads up, I'm inviting my employees, I'm not requiring them to, pair up to do 4180 interviews. So I've got a lot fewer people. You heard about that in the first segment with the commissioner, right? The field is the best classroom. I mean, a class with 23 people in it's going to cost me $70,000, $100,000 in a week that I don't have for a training class. If I've got somebody who's really good at 4180 interviews, watching someone else do it's the best way to train them, right? The other thing is, think about it. I don't want to do the trust fund penalty. I don't want to seize your checking account. You got employees. I don't want them to lose their job. My goal is to keep that business operating. So if seeing 2 revenue officers interview you for the 4180 interview, maybe they're unrepresented, maybe they are, convinces the business owner, you know what, I'm not going to pyramid next week, and I'm going to go out and borrow the money or something because I don't want to meet them again. If that's all it takes to get the employer to the point that they're not my customer long term, and I'm working with them for 90 days instead of 15 months, that's a win for everybody, including you, right? So if you see 2 ROs coming out, it's not because we think there's been a crime. okay? It's because I'm 42% down. It's a way to help train people, and it's got the possible impact of really elevating the seriousness of the non-compliance to the point that the employer is more apt to become compliant. That's it. That's why you're seeing it. Yes?
When we saw you in November, you said that you were doing a beta on being proactive with clients that have had trust fund
Yes.
issues. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going so far?
Yeah.
And the future of that?
Yeah, that's the next slide, actually. But before I leave this, just for those of you who may be have some remaining questions about the trust fund penalty, once I get that interview completed, I'm going to secure a lot of evidence, bank records. I'm going to interview other people, all kinds of stuff. And when I put it all together, hopefully I've got a good picture of who's responsible, or a number of people are responsible, and to what degree. It could be because of the period of time that you're on bank cards or an officer, you're only responsible for one 941 period, or maybe even half of one 941 period, and we break the math down that way, which is why you'll see different principles of a business assess the trust fund penalty at different amounts. As I said earlier, you simply write a check and pay the trust fund amount in advance, no trust fund penalty will be assessed against you. Okay? So that brings me to this next comment here before I go into the proactive approach that what's your name? Ben brought up. I, in 31 years pretty soon, have worked a lot of corporate cases, and I mean hundreds. And I can't name one where I was convinced that the business owner went into business to steal payroll taxes. I'm going to open a dry cleaning business. I might be able to grab the 941 taxes. I've never met anyone who did that. They went into business with the best of intentions, and they just got behind, and they saw the trust fund taxes as a ready source of cash to keep their head above water and thought they'd catch up. And they don't. And when I'm sitting there interviewing them, and it's recently as a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I'm watching this person just in a lot of anxiety. A lien against me personally, my house, etc. The reality of it's hitting them. And they're decent people. I mean, it's not like I'm dealing with Dracula. And I'm feeling like, man, I mean, don't you read? Don't you Google? Don't you spend your time reading IRS.gov? You know? And you're frustrated and you think the message isn't out about this. I wish I had a time machine and I could go back in time and I could tell you, you know what, Ben? Here's what it's going to look like in your life 3 months from now if you file at 941 and you owe these taxes. It's going to be a lien filed. There's an assessment against you personally. There'll be a lien against your house. I might seize your car. I don't want to go there. How can I help you avoid this? What are the odds Ben's going to continue to pyramid payroll tax liabilities? Maybe a great chance he won't, but to some extent, is it worth it if I had that kind of time machine? Well, Commissioner Koskinen a few years ago asked us as part of the Future State Initiative to come up with ways to be more proactive on examination and collection. What if I, at the earliest signs of non-compliance, could identify you and have some sort of soft contact, be it a notice or in person, and educate you in a way that you become compliant on your own without any enforcement by me at all? Wouldn't that be a win for everybody? Well, we had the original proactive tool. It's called the FTD Alert. Since 1972, we've been doing this. And we basically look at deposits from one quarter and a subsequent quarter, and depending on the variance, call that an anomaly, we trigger these paper forms called FTD, Federal Tax Deposit Alerts. Alert meaning I'm going to come out there quickly and talk to you. The problem is, if you're dealing with, for instance, a school district, of course they're not going to have payroll taxes in the summer. The teachers aren't working. The system wasn't set up to catch that. And you could think of other businesses that are seasonal, these false positives. But the skeletal outline of a proactive tool to deal with the most important work we do in field collection, to go to Ben's point, his question a minute ago, we already had it. What if we could make it better? Remember the opening scene from the $6 Million Man? We can make him better than before, etc., right? They have the technology, exactly. Man, The stuff on page 2 of the 941, we weren't transcribing that stuff for years. We have all these new predictive variables and algorithms. We got these PhDs, I'm not kidding you, PhDs that work for us in the main building. What if we could build a better filtering system to detect you really are falling behind before it's too late in the process? And so we did tinker with it. We gave it this name, FTD Alert. Why did we call it X? Because it was like a test plane, a test pilot thing. And Smithsonian's right across the street from us, and that orange plane, Chuck Yeager, the X plane, that's how it got its name. So we built these different algorithms. Now, traditionally, we work about 5,200 federal tax deposit alerts a year. We flooded the tubes with 21,000, different kinds to determine what was junk, what's a waste of time for an RO to go in the field, what's a waste of time to send a notice, they're just going to tear it up. You got to have eyes on the ground with them. And what we learned over that process, and there was actually a trade journal, ran a pretty extensive story, a technical journal, just this year, about the success of it in the indirect collection effect. What we found in 2015 and 16, we followed all 21,000 of these taxpayers, and we figured out a better way to filter and identify taxpayers who only need a notice, why go to the field, and those that get face-to-face contact. And we found a sweet spot where we get a 12% increased voluntary filing and depositing from a taxpayer in subsequent quarters after we've met with them. We're also studying now the effect of visiting practitioners who represent many other taxpayers. Now, when we did this in 15 and 16, I was still spending a lot of my time convincing field revenue officers that they needed to be in the field. So the key is eye-to-eye contact with a taxpayer in certain types of businesses is much more effective than the notices. So the answer is a 12% increase in compliant behavior by businesses. And think about it. 40 minutes, which is about what an FTD alert takes, I show up unannounced at your business. I know they're not too happy about that, but I have no enforcement authority. You don't owe any money. But I point out I'm an enforcement officer. There at an early sign that you may be falling behind, I tell you, I'm not here to take enforcement, but I'm here to tell you that this is what our records show is this accurate. And if you really are falling behind, I explain what 3 months from now is going to look like and give you a chance to make things right again. Isn't that better than me spending 12 to 15 months with you, begging, what's your name back there? Judy. Begging Judy to give me the 4180, right? I mean, I got 2,223 people. I got 1,066,000 cases in my queue, the majority of which are businesses, and I can only get to what's 59% of 178,000? I don't know the math on it. Y'all can figure that out. But that's the small dent I'm putting in it. Wouldn't it be better if up front I could have that kind of effect? So that's what it was the first future state initiative, and yeah, it was pretty successful. The other thing we're working on here, and this is super important, it doesn't exist yet except manually. At the same time, we're working with the Treasury Department. Y'all are familiar with the electronic federal tax payment system? How could we build into the electronic federal tax payment system a way to detect within 72 hours, that's right, 3 days, that you are falling behind, and then have the system trigger an email to you that says, hey, it looks like you're falling behind, without me visiting. So we think we'll have that ready to go in 2020. It takes money to make that happen. So it's the same from the movie The Right Stuff, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. But if we get to this point, not only will the Treasury Department send you an email telling you you're falling behind within 3 days, they're probably also going to tell me. So imagine how much more effective we can be. Imagine how much more effective you would be. Don't your clients come to you when they're way, way behind and they're so deep and they're up to their ears and they're afraid? I mean, what are the odds that you're going to find out a business you're representing is behind within 3 days? It's pretty remote, right? So this is groundbreaking when we get it, and it could be funding dependent right around the corner. So, now we'll talk about what happens when the proactive approach doesn't work. Yeah.
Using the EFTPS system, what happens if you don't go directly through EFTPS, you do say like through QuickBooks? You thinking that'll do the same thing?
If you use
QuickBooks.
QuickBooks?
Well, it is true, yeah, theoretically, but I'm saying is you're not going directly to the system would generate the same letter. I presume it would.
I don't know.
Well, QuickBooks
just makes sure EFTPS
does
for
it
you.
through EFTPS.
Yeah, you have to use the EFTPS system somehow to make those deposits. Yeah.
Unless you send a check.
So the proactive approach doesn't work. Knock, knock, knock. Doesn't matter whether you're an individual or a business. My name's Darren Gale. I'm a revenue officer with the Internal Revenue Service. You owe $60,000. I'm here today to collect that. Can you pay me? If the well, I do it a little bit nicer than that, but it's much more congenial than that, I promise. But the point is, if John can't pay me at that moment, I'm going to try to get financial information. If John tells me get lost, I don't want to talk to you, or if John says I'll get it to you in a week and he misses that deadline, if John's not working with me to help him solve his problem, well, now I am an enforcement officer, and I've got broad enforcement authorities. They start with filing a notice of federal tax lien, as many of you have pointed out, and several of you told me during the break about the effects of tax liens that were filed before you even had a chance, you believe, to work with the IRS, to work with the revenue officer. Yes?
If I have a power of attorney allowing me to represent that taxpayer, are you still allowed to go down to the store?
Peter asked me, am I still allowed to go knock on that taxpayer's door if he has a power of attorney for the taxpayer? The answer is no. No. So if I have a power of attorney on record, it will show up on the ICS Integrated Collection System. It'll show up as POA, as a banner on the screen, and when I click on it, it's going to give me your name and phone number. I'm going to contact you first. Or I might show up at your office first.
That's only if they report the PO.
What's that?
That's only if the CAF unit can get the POA reported.
Well, yeah. So if there's some, well, here's the deal. So Elliot brought up a good point. What if there's been some processing error and the POA is not on the system? I'm going to show up at your client's house or their business. Hopefully they're going to tell me, Elliot represents me, and I'm going to say, what's Elliot's phone number? Goodbye, and I'm going to leave. So that's the process. So the first step is file a lien, right? I should not be filing a lien the minute I get a case. I should be filing a notice of federal tax lien after I've asked you for the money, and I'm pretty sure you're not going to pay me soon enough for me to protect the government's interest. Because, gang, if you file Chapter 7, Chapter 11, Chapter 13, and I'm not a secured creditor, I haven't done my job protecting the United States. The other things I could do, I can levy bank accounts, accounts receivables. I can seize property. I can seize trucks, boats, buildings, cryptocurrency. We had our first seizure of cryptocurrency 3 weeks ago, first time in history. So other things, gold, silver, stock.
That was from an exchange? Or?
Excuse me?
That crypto seizure was from an exchange?
We found it, I believe, inside of a home when we went into a safe.
So you seized the thumb drives with the Bitcoin on it?
Man, I don't want to get too into it, but we got the cryptocurrency. So, yeah, I mean, it's the future. I'll tell you this. So how do we store it? How do we sell it? This is a new frontier, and we're going to be training our employees. There's a special part of field collection called CISO. I'll talk about in just a moment, where I'll really get into the cryptocurrency thing a little bit more. Yes.
What is protocol for, because I've got revenue officers in my area where they're just showing them, even though the power of attorney is on file, they're just showing them at my client's house.
Wow. You should be calling me.
That's a 1203 violation.
Yeah, I mean, that shouldn't happen. Did you call the manager, or?
No, I don't know what, that's why I'm asking.
You don't know what?
I didn't know what to do, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, okay. So the employee's name and phone number should be with your client. Ask the employee first, was it a mistake? It's a good chance it's not in our system.
Yeah, not in this case.
Sorry, gang. I don't know why it did that. Okay. So if we're not honoring the power of attorney, you need to call the manager, and if the employee is not giving you a satisfactory answer, if it's really an issue, again, you got my phone number. This happens infrequently. TICTA does an audit of it. We take it very seriously. Let me know, as somebody pointed out, if you think it was willful, it's definitely a potential violation of law. Yes?
You mentioned that you seize commodities such as gold and silver.
Yes.
Oftentimes, in certain situations, how do you find out that they exist in assets like that?
Sure. The question is, when I seize commodities like gold and silver, how do you find out about it? An informant, potentially. In this case, we were enforcing a summons, and a taxpayer was standing before a federal judge and was having to tell the judge what all the assets were, and we were there too. We summons the insurance company, and the insurance company's got a record of everything in your house that you tell the insurance company you have. We've got a number of ways. Frankly, a guy had a cache of a lot of weapons and cash in his home when I was a revenue officer. I couldn't find him, but I found his ex-wife, and she was happy to tell me where he lived and what he had in a safe under his staircase in his house. And so different ways we find out about it. I think I talked about trust fund penalty in great detail with you already. Disqualified employment tax levy. So how many of you have represented a taxpayer in appeals? So before I levy, you get your day in appeals if you request that hearing timely. But if you accrue another 941 liability within a 2-year period after a timely CDP request, I'm not required to give you your CDP rights before I levy. I can do them simultaneously. It is not required. It's at the discretion of the revenue officer. What I found 3 years ago was that most revenue officers were either not aware or not using that discretion. So if you're seeing more disqualified employment tax levies, it's because I have reminded them a lot that that discretion is there and you use it when they believe it's appropriate. The other item here, suits for injunctive relief. It's laid out in the IRM. If you're pyramiding payroll taxes and everything I've done is failing, and seizure of assets is going to be futile, nothing's going to help recover that money or stop you, I will go to the Justice Department and ask for a suit for injunctive relief, bring you before a federal judge who will enjoin you and require you to stay compliant. And criminal referrals. Very heavy focus on both the injunctive relief and especially with pyramiding employment taxes. Again, read the TIGTA report about the trust fund penalty cases. If the behavior is egregious enough, I'm going to be talking to the fraud technical advisors about whether or not this case has good potential in criminal investigation. Yes?
Under the 98 Act, revenue officers would routinely just put yellow tape around the business and seize the cash register and all that. Especially, you remember Terry Wood in Orlando.
Terry in Florida?
Yeah, remember?
I was a territory manager when Terry was. I know Terry.
Yeah. He loved it. He never saw something he didn't like.
Wow.
But there was never any suit. He would just wrap yellow tape around the place, tape the cash register, and
So a suit's, if seizure is possible, I typically have to seize before a Justice Department's going to want to look at a suit from me. So suits tend to be when seizure is futile. I've tried it, it won't work. Or what am I going to seize? Oxygen bottles from a hospice care if seizure of the assets would be too sensitive. In situations where seizure is futile, either it can't be done or it's already been done, that's when a suit would happen. Elliot?
Didn't the service just lose a huge case where they went in for injunctive relief to compel making of payroll tax deposits and they can't do it?
I don't know all the details, but there was this one case that we're still looking at where we didn't prevail on a suit. The vast majority of the suits for injunctive relief have been quite successful. I'm going to go.
A certain district maybe that had an issue?
I don't know all the details. In fact, the Small Business Council gave me a heads up about it a month or so ago, but we haven't had a conference. I don't know if they're what the next steps are with that case or not. But yeah, I'm aware of that. Yes?
Question about liens. I'm working with a client, with a revenue officer. taxpayers started paying down the liability as soon as the new liability hit because the tax return was being processed. The revenue officer didn't call me and say, hey, he's got this new liability, I'm going to have to file a lien and pay it. He just was very lien happy. And there were previous liens already out.
Yeah, that's...
Is that truly subjective, or should he have given the courtesy of a call before he filed?
I think a taxpayer should always have a conversation with us and attempt to work out an arrangement with us to pay the tax before we make a determination about whether the lien should be filed or not, much less file a lien.
We were working with him, I can't remember who we are, getting financials, but he knows
Y'all, I got about 10 minutes left. I'll stay with you. I got nowhere to go, but in the interest, I know of the program and I know the videotape, and I want to try to get to some other information. So if y'all will just indulge me, I'm going to move through some of this other information. And some of you may not have been in San Antonio. I talked about this. If you've worked with appeals, most of you have, you know the threshold is exercise in ordinary care and prudence to get relief from penalties and certain types of enforcement. Well, on the payroll tax side, if you were the victim of a third party that handles your payroll and they're effectively deceiving you with documents and things, how the heck are you going to catch them? Well, one of the first things they did was change the mailing address so that they intercept the IRS notices that would tip you off for not paying the taxes for you. So since 2015, we issued 2 notices now. If the address has changed, we send a notice to both the old and the new address so that you know your third party has changed the address. We also have enhanced, we've got these inquiry pins. So, yeah.
You've got to be careful with those though, because what we're seeing here in our area is that if you spell out street as opposed to putting ST, these notices are flying all over the clients who can't figure out what's going on. Or if you write number as opposed to suite, they're calling that a change of address. They need to really fine tune those a little bit.
Okay.
And ST and STREET and.
Well, that's the first I've heard. Thank you. That's the first I've heard that. I appreciate that. So inquiry pins. If you don't have one, how many of you have an inquiry pin for your clients? So if they're using a third party with their payroll, there's different things you can do with that inquiry pin, but the taxpayer should be getting an inquiry pin. You can get one too to make sure that the third party who's handling the payroll tax actually made the payments. So you can exercise that ordinary care and prudence. You have to sign up for it, but there's also, through Treasury Department, the electronic federal tax payment early alerts email. You don't get this automatically. You sign up for it, and whenever something strange looks like it's happening with your deposits, they'll send you an email. So that's a good one to tip you off. Did I go the wrong way here? I think I did. Whoa. Oh yeah. So what are the results that we've been seeing? And some of the stuff I've been talking about here. Suits for injunctive relief. Somebody asked me during the break, I'm seeing more of these types of suits and things. Is that something new that y'all are doing? Yeah, we got fewer people, and we're stressing and we're training the living heck out of our revenue officers so that they're very proficient at complex work. Caroline, when she was the Assistant Attorney General, actually taught a 1-hour class that was videotaped that's saved on our training system, and people are still getting course credit for watching it now. Criminal investigation has provided training to our employees, and Justice Department attorneys have also in the last year given us advanced training on things like suits. Suits for injunctive relief were up 12% in 2017. That was on top of an 80% increase in 2016. So if you've noticed an increase, that's correct. Fraud referrals. The entire IRS has seen a decline in fraud referrals over the past few years, with one exception. Field revenue officers saw increases in both 2016 and 2017. In fact, in 2017, even though I'd lost several hundred revenue officers, the number of fraud referrals made and accepted in criminal investigation increased by 5.3%. And the number of potential in-business pyramiding taxpayers declined by almost 2% on the year. One of the first years we'd seen that in decades. Full payments as a portion of our work increased almost 7%, while at the same time, accounts declared uncollectible as a resolution went down by 6%. You see the flip here? More complex work, more successful outcomes, bringing more money into the Treasury. I want to point this out, though, because just in the past month, we're beginning to see an important and critical change in the data. Through April of 2018, this year, fiscal year 2018, we've experienced a 20% decline in the number of accepted fraud referrals. Why is that happening? Our concern is that the people who are sophisticated enough to work a case like that are our higher graded employees, and they're the ones who are retiring. And as they're leaving, they're not training the next generation, so who knows how to do this kind of work. And what did we find? We literally just found this out a week ago. 84% of all the fraud referrals are made by grade 12 and grade 13 revenue officers. And grade 12 revenue officers are retiring at a rate of 7% a year, and grade 13s are retiring at a rate of 8% a year. So there's a direct correlation. So year after year, I've been losing hundreds of revenue officers, and a significant number of them are the ones who do this type of complex work. So even if I hired a large number of people today, I'm still going to be feeling the impact of the last several years of attrition for years to come. Why is that? Because they come in hired as a grade 7, a 5, 7, or a 9. It's going to take 3 to 5 years before they even get to the grade 12 level, matriculate to that level, and have the proficiency to detect indicia of fraud and know how to do a referral. So I've entered, I believe, in the last month into a phase where we're going to, for the first time in 2 years in field collections, start to see declines in fraud referrals because I've simply lost too many of my higher graded people. Now, we're not going to raise any white flag. What I've been doing just in the past week is coordinating with the Fraud Tech Advisor operation, the National Fraud Office, on how we can sort the entire inventory and identify the really, really worst of the worst, the taxpayers who seem to be committing the most egregious behavior on our records. And are those cases already assigned? If they're not, get them assigned. Get an agreement with the fraud office that these are cases we want to look at accelerating a fraud investigation and potentially getting them referred. But even that's a short-term solution, right? I mean, long-term, if I don't have enough people to do the fraud investigations, the numbers are going to continue to come down. But you're the first audience that's hearing that, and I just learned that a week ago.
Is that just by sheer dollar amount?
Right.
The fraud assignment?
Oh, no. There's different criteria. It could be the number of years that you haven't filed. It could be the amount of dollars that are owed. It could be the number of periods. But again, I'll direct you to a public document. The TIGTA audit pointed out the significant number of cases with taxpayers owing, businesses owing significant dollars and significant periods of 941, where why aren't we doing more fraud work there? So that's related to the effort, definitely. So impersonation concerns, you all know, I mean, this has been a big issue. There are millions of impersonation attempts every day. So when my employees come knocking on the door, and they make unannounced field visits, there's a really good chance that a taxpayer has been called in the last year by an impersonator, and they're going to think we're fakes. So you're going to see two forms of identification from our employees. They look like this. Got a Treasury medallion on a leather case, 3-part fold out of their credentials, and they've got this card. It's called a SMART card, or HSPD 12, Homeland Security Presidential Directive 12 card. It's got a serial number on it. If you don't believe this is authentic, they can provide you a toll-free number to verify them. The person who answers the phone is going to know their eye color and everything about them. If you call the police, I hope you don't, but if you're really concerned it's an impersonator, it probably is, and you should call the police. The police in all 50 states and the U.S. territories and the FBI, state and local police, they have access to a 24-hour dispatch number where when they're called out, someone who says they're a revenue officer, the police have access to a system and they can tell who I am, how tall I am, my eye color, hair color, the whole bit, and verify that I'm real. So these are things that we've done to ameliorate the impersonation concerns. What's that? Oh, you remember that story, huh? I think you all heard the story about the sticky notes.
No.
When I was a young revenue officer, I had a girlfriend in Mississippi, and this is the 80s, Post-it notes had just been invented, and whenever she'd visit me in New Orleans, she'd hide these little Post-it notes around with little notes. So I'd remember her for 2 weeks or something because we'd go back and forth visiting one another. One day I'm out in the field working a mechanic, guy owned a body shop, and I could never find him. And his ex-wife, I found her, and she told me where he lived, and I went out to his house, and he opened the door as far as the chain would bring it, and I had my credentials out, and he tried to grab them out of my hand. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't let you touch these. Is there a question I can answer? And he says, yeah, who's Pookie? And she had tucked the yellow Post-it note inside my credential cover, and my nickname for her was Snoopy, because she had all these Snoopy logo items, and she drew a Snoopy cartoon and said, I love you and miss you, Pookie Man. And why she called me Pookie, I don't know, but anyway, for 3 months I worked this case, and every time I talked to this guy, he was like, oh, it's Pookie from the IRS. So thanks for bringing that up again. Just for that, I'm going to do a 4180 interview. Yeah. So these are the things we're focused on. It's already 5 o'clock. Larry, do I have a hard stop?
He's not here.
Okay. I don't think we're going to get to offers and compromise, gang, but I think you'll like talking about the enforcement stuff more. What are we focused on for revenue officers? Getting them back to basics. I'm down to 2,223 people. They're not supposed to be tax collectors. They're supposed to be civil law enforcement officers. They're civil enforcement officers. I need them doing complex work. Many of them haven't done complex work in years. So the increase in training, the emphasis you've seen on suits and things, that's why you're seeing it. The other thing is I have to reestablish a culture of subject matter experts, not only increase training, but I've got virtual, if there's not an expert on a cash register seizure in a particular post of duty, they've got a virtual way to connect with somebody who is, okay? Managers focusing on being a coach and a mentor. Everything I've done for 3 years is going to fail. The most important person in the whole agency is the first level manager. That's the real IRS. That's the leader. And in private industry, I think it's true too. If you hate your boss, you're not going to like your job. No matter what I say or how jazzed up I get on my hope in a town hall, when I leave, they'll never see me again. But if that manager lives that message, their official job title is Supervisory Revenue Officer. They're supposed to be the revenue officer, just like the supervisory special agent in a criminal group. They're supposed to want to be out there. I don't go out and make field calls every month because Mary Beth requires me to. I love the work they do. I like being out there. I like meeting taxpayers. It's better than any reality show. And you get to watch them help people. And if managers, yeah.
An idea for a reality show.
I don't know if they'll put that on TV. And look, if I've got managers that are really out there in the car with them working cases and they're talking about things, the skills are going to wear off on them. If the manager's rusty, the manager's going to learn. If the employee's rusty, the employee's going to learn. So I want the managers to be more of a revenue officer than a manager. And then field presence. It's a field job. The only reason you pay me, you know what it costs to have a field force? A full-time equivalent in field collection costs on average $108,000 a year. So you multiply that times 3,700 people total, managers, analysts, revenue officers, that's a significant human capital investment by the American taxpayer. I'm supposed to be out there in the community creating a deterrence against non-compliance and educating people that aren't learning from the notices. So what does that look like? How many of you don't want me to meet your client face-to-face? There it is. Let me ask you a serious question. How many of you have ever been paid late by your client? Your collection client. How many of you have never been paid by your client? So, do you want to see them every year or two for the same problem? Seriously, gang, I promise you, I've done this 76 times. Lots of them weren't home, but 76 times I've been out there and made contact with taxpayer in 3 years. There's if I'm there face to face, going through a financial statement with you, with your practitioner present, and I'm talking about how much money you can spend on cable TV, who on earth wakes up in the morning and says, today, I hope an IRS agent sits with me and tells me how much money I can spend on cable TV? Nobody wants that. It's naturally intrusive. But if it's done politely and with courtesy, the seriousness of it, right? You and I both get what we want. I don't want to seize a house. I don't want to seize business assets. I don't want to levy a bank account. I don't want a public lien filed. I just want you to become compliant and pay your taxes and tell the truth on your returns. That's it. And if you do that, fine. That enforcement stuff is not what I'm after. And you want to get paid. I want to get paid. And if seeing me face to face is what it takes to say, shoot, I don't want to do that again, and then you don't see him again ever, or for 5 years, was it worth it? You're still in charge. We're meeting in your office or at their business. But think about it. What doesn't that work? You don't want a repeat customer, especially if they don't always pay you on time. We're in the same business, gang. You're trying to modify their behavior, and so am I. And here's what happens, and I haven't been in most of your offices, but I'll bet you got a Keurig machine and artwork on the wall and cookies out there. It's pretty antiseptic, and Darren's just an IRS voice on the conference box, if at all, right? Oh, that ain't so bad. Jeff took care of me. I'll do it again next year, right? But if my revenue officer is sitting in your office, Jeff, and you are an RO, you know what I'm talking about, asking those questions, to some degree, I got to think, oh, shoot, the IRS knows what I look like. Wow, that's the IRS. You want that face-to-face contact, so I can't require it. I can't. But I'm asking you, if you really want to fix their problem long-term, be open to meeting with my revenue officer, with your taxpayer face-to-face, because that's what it'll take to get them long-term compliant. And then maybe you go to another customer that probably pays you on time, right? So just think about it. So just focusing on that one thing, getting financial statements face-to-face, resulted in a 35% increase in our presence in the field. So if you're seeing more revenue officers, it's not an accident. It's actually was over 20% last month. We lost a couple of months with O-freezes. Florida and Eastern Texas are two of the hottest markets for me as far as customers. And they were both off limits for field calls for 6 months. So no field calls there. So a little bit of a dip, but right after January 31st, everything came right back up.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. How many? Some of you are from Texas here, aren't you? Everybody make out okay? Any problems with my revenue officers working your cases during that period? Could you let me know about it? Okay. Yeah. Got it. Yeah. 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 Would you? I'm going to give you. I want to hear about it. If you can call me later. I want to share with you some real cases, gang. And give you an idea of what complex work looks like from revenue officers. This is not from the 1980s or the 1960s. These are things that have happened in the past few months. The owner of a public accounting firm in Florida is facing tax charges after allegedly failing to file tax returns for several years, then lying to a revenue officer. In April, a federal grand jury returned an indictment against the owner of a business who specializes in wealth planning. According to a Justice Department announcement, the owner is charged with evading payment of his personal taxes under 7201, failing to pay taxes withheld from employees under 7202, and failing to file tax returns from 2011 to 2016 under 7203. Even before he stopped filing returns, the owner failed to pay his taxes as listed a moment ago. After the IRS audited him and attempted to collect the unpaid taxes, he stopped paying himself through his company's payroll and just paid his personal expenses with the corporate bank accounts. He also allegedly lied to a revenue officer trying to collect the tax debt. If convicted, he faces up to 5 years. This case was worked and referred by a revenue officer in Florida. And we're talking about a 433A, not a 4180 interview. When we talk about perjury, all right? Last month, a Missouri business owner was sentenced for failing to pay over to the IRS a large balance due in payroll taxes. A U.S. district judge sentenced the owner to 3 years in federal prison without benefit of parole. The court also ordered him to pay restitution. He pled guilty for failure to pay over to the IRS payroll taxes. The taxpayer and owner of this transportation business ran school buses. He operated the business under 3 different names and failed to fully pay employment taxes in each of the 3 businesses. At the time of his guilty plea, the owner admitted that his criminal conduct resulted in a large tax loss, and according to court documents, he continued to violate tax laws after his change of plea hearing. But the revenue officers uncovered additional harm in the amount of more than $1 million. The owner admitted that he did not deposit the federal, the FICA and Medicare taxes or income taxes that he withheld from his employees' wages. And while accruing those liabilities, he withdrew significant amounts of cash, purchased new buses, maintained a personal collection of cars. And during that time, he purchased and maintained a Lamborghini. 2 months before his guilty plea, he sold it. Then instead of using the proceeds to pay the taxes, he engaged in a series of banking transactions to conceal the proceeds and evade payment. According to the documents, he also filed bankruptcy to hinder IRS collection efforts. That case was investigated and referred by a revenue officer.
What are the sources of those?
U.S. Justice Department press releases. So if you go to DOJ.gov and type in the search engine employment taxes, somebody in this room who was former Assistant Attorney General set up a special website where you can see civil and criminal actions taken against taxpayers for employment taxes. Yes, only employment taxes. It's got its own special section on the DOJ website. It's a special partnership we've had with DOJ since 2015. And one of the things DOJ did was create a dedicated website to spotlight and help deter that kind of behavior.
Is there one for other personal taxes?
Is there one for personal? Well, DOJ Tax Division has a website, and yeah, you can see all the individual taxes too, but the initiative that specifically I've been heading together with my counterparts at DOJ is about employment taxes.
No, this is an excellent marketing tool to show.
Oh yeah. You can print these out and show them to your clients, absolutely. We have one here from Michigan. A business owner pleaded guilty to willfully failing to pay over employment taxes. According to documents provided to the court, he operated 4 professional employer organizations. He provided payroll-related services to client companies. He processed payroll and agreed to withhold. Despite this obligation, he didn't pay them. He collected through 2012 and the first quarter of 2013, he admitted he did not pay the IRS employment taxes for an additional business he owned. In total, he did not pay more than $1.5 million. Judge Bernard Friedman has recently scheduled sentences. He faces up to 5 years. Missouri businesswoman led a $1.5 million tax fraud scheme, sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. She's ordered to pay $1.5 million in restitution. She owned a healthcare business. She collected employment taxes but did not pay them. She also withheld employee IRA contributions, medical, dental insurance payments, and child support. But she kept those withholdings for herself and her relatives. She pleaded guilty. Again, these are cases worked not by the FBI. These are cases that revenue officers worked and referred to IRS criminal investigation. In January, a jury in Virginia convicted 2 business owners of tax evasion, conspiring to structure currency transactions. According to evidence at trial, the owners of a subcontracting business provided labor to renovate large retail department and grocery stores. They operated out of their home. They filed their 2009 to 14 personal returns with the IRS reporting the income earned from the business but failed to pay the taxes, penalties, and interest owed, despite the IRS revenue officer repeatedly contacting them over a period of years about their delinquent taxes and filing liens. They refused to pay. They used nominees to conceal their ownership of property and filed false documents with the IRS. After the IRS issued levies on personal bank accounts, they used funds from the business bank account to start a cattle business and pay their children's wedding expenses. The evidence at trial also proved they repeatedly withdrew cash from the business in amounts less than $10,000 to evade federal bank reporting requirements, structuring more than $250,000 in withdrawals. They face a statutory minimum of 5 years. I could go on and on and on. If you think revenue officers are only in a tax collection business, they have been really important to criminal investigation. The last 2 years, the only part of the Internal Revenue Service that saw an increase in fraud referrals was from field revenue officers. That's no accident. We worked closely with Caroline at the time in 2015 and since, and together with criminal investigations. So the focus, especially on employment taxes, has been intense. But that's why I showed you that pie chart earlier. It's not just because we want to or because it's easy. In fact, it's hard. But it's 72% of the nation's revenue. We have to do something. We want a deterrence. And these are definitely some of the most egregious taxpayers. But you're also seeing, I was talking to a gentleman at the break, reducing liens to a judgment. If the statutory period's about to expire and there's significant equity in a home, we're going to be filing a suit to reduce the claim to a judgment if we think we can pay the taxes later with the equity in that home. You're also seeing suits to foreclose on the federal tax lien. So where we reduce the lien to a judgment, this is where the Marshal Service will actually sell the property. Not putting anybody under a bridge, right? Not to cause a hardship. You will find it in the Legal Reference Guide for Revenue Officers. It specifically says we're supposed to address hardship. So if we think selling the house will cause a hardship, we may only get the judgment, or neither. And suits to enforce a summons. That seizure of the cryptocurrency I told you about a moment ago. That resulted from a suit to enforce a summons. Now, doing all this complex work, this is not easy. I suspect the majority of my employees, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but clearly more than half, have either never done a complex action like I just described, or they haven't done one in years. So as they move into this area, because it's their job, right, when it's appropriate, they will do these things. They're going to need the support to make sure they're only doing it when it's appropriate, when it's the right time, and that they got every I dotted and T crossed. And this new organization, Field Collection, will make it happen. It's called Civil Enforcement Advice and Support Operations, or CESO. This is the old Collection Advisory Organization, the Revenue Officer Advisors, and it's the PALS, the Property Appraisal and Liquidation Service Specialists. I am only hiring people in this organization who pass a really aggressive and rigorous interview process. I want the best of the best, the smartest brainiacs I can put in here, because we can't get the kind of cases I described wrong. If we have to do a seizure, it better be the right seizure to do, and it better be done properly. If we're doing suits against taxpayers, it better be the right thing to do, and we better have done it properly. They will make sure that happens. It's basically our think tank within Field Collection. They are helping us right now, working with IRS counsel and criminal investigation, and maybe DOJ soon, on figuring out what our policy on cryptocurrency is going to be. So how do you store it? How do you sell it? How do you value it? Things like that. This is a new frontier for us. It started about, at least in Field Collection, it started about 3 weeks ago. CI was already there, and the Marshal Service too, and others. But for Field Collection, we expect to see more and more of this. So how do we address it in-house? So this is the organization that's going to make that happen. I've gone 8 minutes over, and I was going to talk about offers in compromise, but y'all know that could be a long conversation, right? How many of you have heard we got a new program at the IRS? All right? And if you look it up, depending on how far back you want to go, we do. On March the 2nd, 1831, Congress passed a law called an Act for the Relief of Certain Insolvent Debtors of the United States and Pensions for Veterans of the American Revolution and Indian Scouts. And it was the first authority given to the Commissioner of the Revenue, or the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, to compromise a legally perfected debtor of the United States. And guess what the threshold was? Doubt as to liability or doubt as to collectability. Yeah, Indian Scouts, believe that. But the Revolution. How many of you have ancestors that fought in the Revolution? Anyway, so this was about getting them a pension, but it also included how the government writes off its bad debt, so it's really not that new. I would ask the sponsors of the event, do we have time to go into offers, or should we wrap it up? Mary Beth, I warn you, see, this happened last time. They ask a lot of questions, okay? So, you know the history of the program, so up until about, even back in 1933, there was an effort to consider special circumstances for offers, but the Justice Department told the then Bureau of Internal Revenue, you know what, if Congress had meant for there to be a third basis for compromise, they'd write it in a statute. And it didn't really happen until 1998 with RA 98, where in addition to collectability and liability, you could also compromise if you fall in the cracks there with special circumstances. Yes, Elliot?
For those who have to go,
Oh.
Could you give us your number?
Oh, yes, it's on the, it's 202-317-3583.
What's your cell?
My cell number, wait, yeah.
What's your year of birth?
My cell number is 202-674-2640. 202-674-2640.
Can you repeat the first number, Darren?
202-317. Why do I have this image of like a 317-3583? Yeah.
So we're gonna have a reception. I don't know how much longer you want to go for, but the reception's basically starting now. We'll go to like around 7, but it's gonna be right if you go up the escalator over here.
Okay.
Go up to the top and you'll see the trail up there.
Don't try to go down to the door, go to that escalator. This one's coming the wrong
You
way.
can try to go up that one. That would be kind of fun.
Larry, they did it again.
I already did it last night.
So doubt as to liability, there's no fee you have to pay with this, right? Now, it's a small percentage of all the offers. It's been around since the original temporary statute. The first permanent statute, 7122, is 1864, if anybody's curious. It happened during the Civil War. But we had temporary authority to compromise between 1831 and 1864. But doubt as to liability was always one of them. And this is basically reopening an audit, in a sense. You don't have to pay anything with this offer, okay? They do take a while to work, though, because exams work in these cases, not collection, and they're basically reopening the audit, and they're working it in priority basis. Then there's doubt as to collectability. This is by far the largest population of offers in compromise. Doubt as to collectability. If you can pay in full right now or through installment payments, you are not a candidate for an offer in compromise. You're not. You're supposed to pay your tax in full through an installment agreement through the life of the statute, if it's an installment plan, or right now, or shorter term, unless you have special circumstances. Now, what's a special circumstance? You've got a kid with a terrible disease, and it's not fully covered by health insurance. You've got $35,000 a year in out-of-pocket medical costs. A lot of people, unfortunately, have a situation like that. So if I say you can pay in full, but I deduct that $35,000 from it, well, now it looks like, no, you can't pay in full, and that gives me an offer amount based on those special circumstances. And there are different kinds of special circumstances. If you read the booklet, Form 656 at irs.gov, it'll describe for you how to do that calculation. Yes?
How do you differentiate between special circumstance and effective tax administration?
I think they're the same thing, right?
I tried to make a case and I was denied based
Okay.
on effective. tax administration.
So,
I had to go back with data to collectability and special circumstances.
what's that? What special circumstances? Yeah. The pre-qualifier tool, how many of you have tried to use it? It's great, right? Good. So you all know how effective it is. Let me just give you a statistic if you're curious. Through the end of last year, if you filed an offer in compromise without using a pre-qualifier tool, and we can track who uses it, there was a 40% acceptance rate. It's the highest in the offer program. If you filed an offer in compromise and you didn't use the pre-qualifier tool, the acceptance rate is 36%. So it's still not that far off, but if it's your offer, it's a big deal, right? Yes, Claudia? Yes, there's a box that you check on your offer in compromise form. It asks you if you use the pre-qualifier tool. So I'm not sure how 100% accurate it is, but if you self-identified on the offer, the 656, that you use the pre-qualifier tool, that's how we're tracking it. Yeah. You do not qualify for an offer, right, unless you've received a bill. You also don't qualify for an offer if all your tax returns aren't filed, or if your federal tax deposits aren't current, or if your estimated tax payments haven't been made. Penalty and interest continues to accrue while we're considering your offer in compromise, all right? If your offer is accepted, you have to stay in compliance through the 5th year, or longer if you have an extension on that 5th year return. If you're in bankruptcy, you can't file an offer. The bankruptcy is going to handle all your debts. A lien will usually not be filed. It might be, but generally speaking, we do not file a federal tax lien while your offer is pending. Okay? If your taxes have been referred to the Department of Justice, we can't consider an offer in compromise. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. It's a rather exotic tool. I don't see many of them at all, but it's called an offer in settlement if you want to settle over with DOJ. You can't settle with IRS. If you have an approved installment agreement, you can stop making installment payments while your offer is pending, and your offer won't default. If we don't accept your offer, we reinstate the installment agreement right at the back end. The user fee is $186 unless you have a low-income waiver. Now, you all realize that we're supposed to, by law, charge user fees that reflect the actual cost of the services and benefits we provide people, right? And we do a biennial review. And our biennial review was in 2017. We determined that the cost of an offer to the IRS is $2,170. So we have submitted proposed regulations to Treasury to recoup the full cost. Now that, before it would ever become effective, is subject to public comments. So keep an eye out for that. But the last time the offer fee was changed was in 2014. It went up from $150 to $186. Two types of offers: lump sum, you put 20% down and you pay within 5 payments. Or you have the periodic payment. You pay within 6 months, so more than 5, between 6 and 24 months, 2 years. Okay? And you make the first payment with the offer, and you continue to make those monthly payments while the offer is being considered, or you'll default that offer. And let me give you some statistics on the offer program in case you're curious. One of my peers was kind enough to share this with me. We had 62,243 offers in compromise received in 2017. That's down 1% from 2016 when we had 62,937. Our decline in resources has led to some delays in processing despite the decrease in receipts. The acceptance rate in 2017 was 39%. That's down from 2016 when the acceptance rate was 42%. Keep in mind, if you use the pre-qualifier tool, the acceptance rate is 40%. We have 121 offer and compromise specialists in the field. We have 188 that work in the campus. So I said there are some delays because we have fewer people. We try to work offers in 9 months. This is the latest data as of April 2018. The percentage of cases closed within 9 months is 82%. So frankly, not bad considering how much smaller the staff is. The breakdown is such. Within 3 months, 24%. Cases closed within 6 months, 3 to 6 months, 29%. Within 6 to 9 months, 29%. Cases that take between 9 months and a year, 10%. And only 8% of cases take longer than a year for us to work. Any questions about offers in compromise? Yes?
I'm curious about, since we're talking about revenue officers, when we submit the 656 to the revenue officer, they have to fill out the 657, and they check that box solely to delay.
Yes.
What recourse do we have? I had one of those, and it was not, so because she said it was, she got it back, and where do I go with that? She just got on that and consider it for an offer?
No, I got a real case. I'm dealing with a real case right now on that where an offer in compromise was submitted and the taxpayer's refusing to provide financial information. We have no clue how much money the taxpayer makes to determine if it's an acceptable offer.
Well, that makes sense.
So the 657 document, which is the transmittal document, if you submit an offer in the field, I'm required to review it to see if it's processable, et cetera, before I send it to the campus OIC processing site. One of the things, as Kenneth points out, I have to determine is, did you submit it just to delay collection? In this case, and a representative called me, or didn't call me, filed a taxpayer assistance order and said, we're stopping them from getting their offer considered, just send it to the campus. There's no need for you to check that box. Well, yeah, it is. It's in 5.8, if you're curious. IRM 5.8 lists all the procedures for the offer in compromise program, and it's a requirement for the revenue officer to check that box. But the practitioner, Kenneth, reached out to me and said, foul play, the RO's wrong, it's not solely delay. So they got me personally involved and the next level executive in the chain, the first level executive. We both looked closely at it, and this taxpayer is refusing to give us his address or any financial statements. So my guess is it almost sounds like a Jeff Foxworthy thing. It might be submitted to delay, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't. We did everything.
But if you think
that it was an in-business CNC.
Yeah, and look, you're a former RO, so I'm sure you know what you're doing. So if you think, in all seriousness, if you think we're checking that box and we shouldn't have, you need to get management involved. Start with the first level manager and then work your way up. You got my direct number. So I got involved in this when it didn't work out too well for the rep because I'm sorry, I mean, if you won't give me your address or a financial statement, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not you can't pay.
As a revenue officer, I only checked that box once, and that's because I knew the guy had $60,000 under the mattress.
I didn't know.
Money and then let it go through.
Well, frankly, I don't know if I come across as somebody who knows a lot of procedures, but I didn't realize until 2 months ago when I got that case that my RO was required. I thought they could just send the offer straight to the campus, but if they send it to a revenue officer, there's no way around it. The revenue officer is required to do that first filtering and report on whether they think it's solely to delay. And the rep wanted me to say, just send it, don't check the box. And so I would have been happy to say, yeah, send it, don't check the box. But when I asked, it does appear, in my opinion, it is submitted solely to delay. Yeah.
But a question about, I used to offer an AP for ETAs. I've always had a bad history in the past. I just weren't accepted. What's the, and I haven't done one for probably 5 years. What's the IRS's current position on things?
On effective tax administration offers? Well, I mean, if you have special circumstances, I mean, it's case-by-case basis. I can tell you, I've seen some offers that they're happening on a regular basis. They're getting accepted. Uh-huh.
I haven't had good success, but that was 5 years ago, not maybe now.
If you've got any concerns about the offer program, so Ron Takagi is the Director of Specialty Collection for Offers. And don't ask me to spell his last name. I apologize. It's a tough one for me. But if you reach out to me, I'll get you in touch with the director in charge of the offer program, and y'all can give him any specific concerns you have. And Ron's a good guy. He'll put just as much effort and energy as I do when you reach out to me about something the revenue office is working on. Yes?
I found that the pre-qualifier tool is
incomplete. It doesn't really do a deep enough analysis in that, for example, if there's a taxpayer who has an IRA, there isn't really a provision to allow calculating the tax impact of pulling money out an IRA to fund an offer, or in determining the assets of the taxpayer.
Alan, do you have some ideas about how we can, I'm serious, that's a good one, frankly, because it's a 10% early withdrawal penalty, right? Could, if any of you, so listen, we built the pre-qualifier tool, but we built it in our own bubble. Some really smart people built it. I think it's one of the, because I tinkered with it myself when I used to be involved in the offer program. I think it works great, but I'm an IRS person. So if you've got ideas about how we can tweak and make something better, it's ours. We own it, we built it, we can tweak it. So please send me ideas, and collection policy oversees that tool. So I can work with the Director of Collection Policy on making adjustments to the pre-qualifier tool. So please send that to me. Yeah. Anything else? What? Who? Mine? Oh man. It's my first name. Oh, hang on. Let me just go to the slide here. Make it easy for y'all. It's my first name dot my last name. You can see my first and last name up there on the screen, followed by the number 2. Yeah, at irs.gov. So it's my first name dot my last name, followed by the number 2 at irs.gov. If you're curious about why is there a number 2 there, it's not because they think very little of me. It's because I had a computer crash in Detroit in 2005, and when they rebuilt my hard drive on a new computer, they couldn't figure out how to set up my email address again, so they had to create a new email address, so they put a 2 after my name. So every time I see that 2 on my email address, I remember losing everything. In 2005. Yeah?
We have an offer, we send directly to the campus, and our RO gets assigned, does it go back to them?
No. Now, if you send an offer in compromise directly to the campus, if you're not a field employee, it's not going to come back to an RO. Any other question? Every time am I going to ask him that again? Yes.
So if we have a business client that has payroll taxes older, and we want to do an offer, but trust fund penalties have not been established on the personal side. So I have.
You want an offer on the business? Mm-hmm. What's your name?
Gina.
Gina, thank you. That's it. That's something I plan to cover, and I rushed through it and I skipped that. So here's the process. If you have a business that wants to submit an offer in compromise, the trust fund taxes have to be paid, or the trust fund penalty has to be addressed, not necessarily assessed, but addressed on every potentially responsible officer. So if there's 3 officers, and we did 4180 interviews, and we assessed 1 but not 2, said they're not liable, then you don't have to pay the employment taxes, and at that point you can go ahead and submit the offer. Oh, and by the way, especially for you folks in Texas, you should be proud. If you're the victim of a third-party payroll service, right, you don't have to comply with those trust fund rules on a business. You submit that offer, and it's worked by a special offer team in Austin, Texas. That's all they do, is work offers in compromise on businesses that are impacted by people who handled their payroll and did bad things. Yes?
Just curious, you spend a lot of time on this third-party fraud scenario. Is that something that happens a lot?
Yes. So here's how bad it is. I mean, I was a territory manager when the first time one of these happened, and we talk about millions of dollars, and the companies they were handling the payrolls for, they still owe the taxes. Yeah. And where'd the money go? It wasn't like, it's like watching an episode of American Greed when you see some of these people with their retirement accounts or the Bernie Madoff type stuff, you never recover all that money. So it became, as the problem proliferated, not quite to the extent that the impersonation scams are now. How many of you have gotten a call from somebody saying, oh, I'm the U.S. Internal Revenue Service and I'm going to put you in jail? Anybody get a call like that?
Not with that accent.
Yeah.
Not with that accent.
Oh, I get it. But they were proliferating to some extent, and the IRS realized, wow. So criminal investigation vigorously goes after them. In fact, one of the examples I didn't share with you all was a referral. Oh yeah, I did it. The last one, I think the last one I shared was a professional employer organization that we got criminally prosecuted. IRS did. But we wanted to give taxpayers tools to catch these people before. We gave you tools to exercise ordinary care and prudence, and it's because, yes, the problem was getting worse and worse. And if you think about it, it's these third-party services, they don't just handle one business, they handle multiple businesses, and now you're talking about hundreds and thousands of employees, and the impact on that pie chart that I showed you is an understandable concern for us. Yes?
To what extent, if any, have you been experiencing offers for doubters to liability due to business identity theft?
Yeah, so offers in compromise used to be part of field collection, but it's not anymore. So I don't get the reports. I don't know the data on that. But if you want to know, I can reach out to Ron and find it. The question was how many doubters to liability offers are submitted because someone's a victim of identity theft. I don't know. Yes, John.
Yeah, is there a problem with submitting the offer directly to Memphis and sending a copy to the RO?
Is there a problem with sending the offer directly to the Memphis OIC, centralized offer site, and sending a copy to the RO? So long as the RO understands it's already in Memphis. But you don't want, I mean, if the case isn't assigned to that RO, I mean, you don't want the RO to feel like they've got to go through that process of determining is it submitted solely to delay, is it processable? You don't want duplication of effort. So if it's not a field case, send it directly to the campus. If it's a field case, send the offer to the RO. Because if it's a field case and you send it to the campus, they're going to send it to the RO to give it a look first.
Yeah, so I've had a couple instances of
Yeah.
the RO just go and nothing happens for like a year. And I find out the person retired, the case didn't sign.
Yeah, John brought up a great point. You know, it doesn't happen that often. It really doesn't. But when you have attrition like this, is it possible that your file gets misplaced or someone just forgets to reassign or it takes a while to reassign the work of somebody who retired? Yeah, that could happen. You need to pick up the phone and call somebody who can dig up that case, because we're not going to tell you, oh, Darren retired, sorry, it's going to be a year before we get to your case. We're going to say, oh, we're sorry, we'll get it assigned right away. So if you're experiencing, if your nose tells you this is way beyond the normal government delay, you need to call somebody, call me, so we can look into it.
Or documents lost.
Yes.
Are you getting more referrals from state governments? Because, like, for example, the state of Maryland, and this has happened the last year or two, have been doing more audits, and their argument is that the IRS is doing less audits, so they're going to start doing more audits.
Oh, okay. Great question.
And then referring the findings to the IRS.
So Stephen wants to know if the uptick, if there is one in any particular state, in audit activity at the state level, is that due to the decline in the number of revenue agents or tax examiners at IRS? We share information. The state shares information with us, etc. So, and I don't have the exam program, but is it possible that there is an impact that they're not getting? I mean, no, I don't think so, because the information the states are getting from us are from your returns, not the audits that we do. So that's private, okay? So if we're doing an audit and we think, oh, you did this bad thing, etc., we're not saying, oh, hey, you know, Michigan, guess what Darren did, etc. So we can't do that.
But they transmit the adjustment. If there's, like, let's say there's an adjustment of income up, the IRS will transmit that to the state. And Maryland, and then Maryland picks it up, and then they...
Yeah. Okay. Carolyn, you had a...
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that's right. It's when the audit's over, the RAR, and then in Maryland, if you don't file an amended return, the statute remains open. You've got a year to do it.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, that makes
Maryland's
sense.
going the other way. They're doing the audit. The state is doing the audit, and then they're saying they're transmitting it to the IRS, but I'm not sure. I've had two of them so far. One of them, we amended the federal returns. The other one, the client said, I'm not doing anything. I'm going to let the statute expire on the federal side. So I'm waiting to see if the IRS will, you know, for 3 years, we got, you know.
I got to admit, you have stumped me, because that's not...
Yes.
I don't even have that in my talking points.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
If you've heard of it, yeah. They're doing more audits at the state level.
No, it sounds like that might be possible, but I just don't know. was another question.
I've got one.
Yes.
I have a revenue officer with an ongoing business that's got fairly delinquent, about $600,000 payroll tax. She's now current, but he says he wants to get a trustee to come in and run the business. Is that a new program you've got going?
Wait. My revenue officer said they want a trustee to come in and run your business?
Yes, sir. Maybe you call it a trustee?
Are you working with an ATAT revenue officer, or abusive tax avoidance transaction? You work?
There's no bankruptcy
No bankruptcy.
and current compliance.
Yes, now.
Yeah, could you give me a holler?
Okay, I just like to see what he's talking about.
Yeah, I'd like to know a little bit more about that case. Where is it, Texas?
No, I know I sound like Texas.
Yeah.
Virginia.
Virginia? Okay, I'm in Virginia. What part?
Richmond.
Okay. Yes.
Darren, since the beginning of the year, when I'm getting a 92, 97 from an RO, they're asking for a 2-week turnaround.
Well, I mean, it might be reasonable, but typically I'd say 30 days. If it's really easy stuff, 2 weeks might be reasonable, but
The first 92, 97, and then when I call the group manager says, well, we'll give you 30 days. So
yeah,
that's
30 days is kind of the general range.
directive to switch from 30 days to 2 weeks?
Is it what?
Was there a directive
No.
put out to the field?
No, it's up to we don't even direct ROs. It's basically what's reasonable. And frankly, the way it works, John, is it's kind of an amenable thing. It's not Darren saying you got 2 weeks. It's Darren and John have a conversation, and you convince me. I think it sounds reasonable, 2 weeks, and you say no. I need 4 weeks, and here's why. Now you shifted the burden to me to tell you no. I think that's not right. I think 2 weeks is plenty because. So it should be an amenable thing. Another 2 weeks is not a big deal.
It doesn't work that way. If you'll get an RO that goes through that, I said, I'm going on vacation, or I'm going to be at this and I can't do it.
That's what I'm worried about. So what Jeffrey mentioned is what I can't have. He said, sometimes you get an RO who says, oh, I'm going to be out of the office, I'm going on leave.
I was going to be out, I need the extension. She goes, no, I want it. I said, I won't be in town.
All right, well, I don't need it. So you're the practitioner. You're a human being. You got to go to the bathroom, you got to sleep, and you take vacations. So if you're away for 2 or 3 weeks, unless it's a significant problem and risk to the Treasury, if we don't do something in 2 weeks or 30 days, I simply write in my case history, I talked to Jeffrey today, he's going to be unavailable for the next 2 weeks, ask for an extension, etc., and I give you the 2 week extension.
It should be that.
Now, if you're going on a cruise, one of those Viking cruises for 3 months.
I'll take it with me, but you won't.
Yeah.
But, and I've run into that quite a bit, and I've actually gotten a response, oh, well, there are other practitioners on this POA. They can take care of it. What? Are you kidding? It's not the case. It's my case.
One of my employees told you got other people at your firm who can take care of it.
Absolutely. Multiple times. Multiple.
So y'all all heard that, right? Or at least you heard me repeat it. That's the kind of stuff I need to know about, because I'm not just training employees to be more technical and do complex work. There's a nice way to do this job. In fact, I demand it. I want them to be the way I am with you in this room. No matter what your taxpayer is doing, my employees need to behave just like you'd expect any other federal officer of the U.S. government to behave. So comments like, it's not up to me to decide what the staffing resources at your law firm or your CPA or your enrolled agent firm are, okay? So I need to know if I have employees who communicate that way. Thank you. That's it? Thank y'all.